Welcome to Potter Read. Today's adventure, a forgotten goblin, oath made 5-year-old Harry, the ward of the entire Deep Nation. If you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1. The Finding of the Oath. 3 floors beneath the marble hall where wizards counted their little heaps of gold, in a room without windows and without warmth, a goblin named Grivnak found a mistake that was 91 years old. He did not find it the way wizards found things, by luck or by rummaging. He found it the way water finds the crack in a wall. It was the season of the long audit, when the ledgers of the dormant estates were carried up from the salt vaults and laid open on the reckoning slabs, and every clause and codicil in the keeping of Gringotts was read aloud once, in the old tongue, against the master tallies. It was tedious work. It was sacred work. Grivnak had done it for 41 audits and had never once looked forward to it, which he considered the correct attitude. Because a task you enjoyed was a task you hurried. The slab in front of him held the Potter accounts. There was not much living about the Potter accounts anymore. The main line had guttered out to a single heir, a child, no gold moving. The vault sealed under a guardianship clause that Grivnak found distasteful for reasons he had not bothered to name. He read the standing balances. He read the entail. He read the schedule of heirlooms in the deed vault, item by item, and the dust of the parchment got into the back of his throat, and he did not drink because drinking was for after. He came to the appendices, which no one read because the appendices of an old house were where dead men filed the promises they were ashamed of, and he read those too. The oath was in the 9th appendix, folded into a leaf of goat vellum gone the color of weak tea, and it was written in 2 hands. Grivnak stopped. He had a particular way of stopping that the younger clerks had learned to watch for. He set both palms flat on the slab. He did not lean in. He looked at the vellum the way you look at a stone you have just realized is not a stone but the top of a head. The first hand was human, a fast slanting wizard's script, the ink oxidized to rust. The second hand was goblin, not a clerk's goblin, not the tidy accounting runes that filled the rest of the ledger, but the deep script, the ceremonial cut. Each character struck as if into metal even though it lay only on skin. Grivnak knew the deep script the way he knew his own teeth. He had learned it at 11 from a grandmother who had rapped his knuckles with a tally rod every time he rounded a stroke, and he had not rounded the stroke since. You did not write the deep script for money. You wrote it for the things that outlived money. He read the goblin hand first. That was training. A goblin's word on a document was the load-bearing wall. The wizard's word was the paint, sworn under the root, in the 43rd year of the stewardship of Nagnok, son of Nagnok, between the house of Potter, wizard, and the nation of the deep, that a debt of the blood be answered by a debt of the blood. Witnessed at the 3rd gate, sealed hot. Below it, pressed into a coin of black wax the size of a thumbnail, was a seal Grivnak had seen exactly twice in his life, both times behind glass. It was the seal of the Undermoot. Not a bank seal, not a guild seal. The seal that the whole nation used when the whole nation was a party, and the whole nation was a party, perhaps once in a century, and never in Grivnak's memory. On behalf of a wizard, he sat back on his stool. The stool complained. He let it. 91 years. The date on the wizard's hand put the swearing at a summer near the close of the last century, and the reckoning clause, when he found it, was the part that made him get up and lock the door. He did not hurry even then. He was a goblin of Gringotts, and hurry was a wizard's disease. He unlocked the door again, because a locked door in the audit rooms would bring a supervisor faster than a scream, and he sat back down and he read the whole instrument through twice more, top to bottom, both hands. And then he did what the law required and did not want to do, which was to believe it. The oath had a name, tucked in the margin in the grandmother neat runes of some long-dust scribe, the blood word of the 3rd gate. And under the name, the reckoning clause, the trigger, the thing that made an oath something other than a dead man's sentiment. Should the last of the sworn blood, being a child under the age of first magic, be found in want of guard, unfed, unwarded, given to hands that do not hold, then the debt falls due, and the nation answers, and the child is the nation's ward until the ward be no longer a child. Grivnak read that clause the way another goblin might read the assay on a bad ingot, slowly and with a growing cold interest in exactly how bad it was. Being a child under the age of first magic. A wizard child who had not yet done accidental magic. A small one. 5 years, 6. Found in want of guard, unfed, unwarded. Given to hands that do not hold. He knew, without checking, that the last Potter was a child of about that age. He knew, because it was his business to know where money slept, that the guardianship clause on the vault had been filed by no Potter but by a wizard named Dumbledore, and that it placed the heir with relatives who were not of the wizarding world at all. He had thought it distasteful an hour ago and had not known why. Now he knew why. The oath had known before he did. He rolled the vellum with 2 fingers gently, the way you close the eyes of the dead, and he weighed in his mind the single most dangerous fact in the room, which was this. An oath sealed with the Undermoot seal was not the property of the bank. It was the property of the nation. Gringotts could not sit on it. Gringotts could not quietly lose it. To find such an oath and fail to report it up the throat of the deep was itself an offense against the root, and the root did not fine you. Grivnak was 59 years old, which, for a goblin, was the exact age at which one has stopped being reckless and not yet started being cautious. And he understood that he had just found the most important thing he would ever find, and that it was going to make his life extremely inconvenient, and that there was not the smallest thing he could do about either. He took the vellum and the master tally and the black seal in its little wooden coffer, and he went to find Ragnarok. Ardain, the director of Gringotts, did not keep an office so much as a lair with good lighting. Ragnarok had held the directorship for 30 years, which was a long time to hold anything 100 other goblins wanted, and he had done it by being correct more often than he was clever, which is rarer and harder. He was old enough that the ridges of his brow had gone the gray of struck flint, and he wore his authority the way a mountain wears snow, without noticing it. When Grivnak came in, he was reading a wizard's letter with an expression of profound and settled contempt, and he did not look up. "Ledger clerk," Ragnarok said, "you have walked past 2 supervisors and a steward to stand in my doorway. Either you are lost, or you have found something that frightens you. You do not look lost." "Director," Grivnak set the coffer on the desk, and beside it the vellum, and he stepped back the correct distance and put his hands where they could be seen, which was the courtesy of a goblin bringing dangerous news. The long audit, the Potter estate, the 9th appendix. Ragnarok's eyes went to the coffer first. He was old enough to know a seal coffer by its shape. He set the wizard's letter down without folding it, which for Ragnarok was the equivalent of another creature leaping to his feet. "Open it." Grivnak opened it. The black seal lay in its bed of felt, and the light took it, and for a moment, neither goblin said anything, because there are objects in the world that shorten a conversation simply by existing. "That is not ours," Ragnarok said at last. It was not a question. It was the first move in the reckoning, the establishing of jurisdiction, and Grivnak answered it correctly. "No, Director, it is the nation's. The Undermoot seal, on an oath of the deep, sworn under the root at the 3rd gate. I found it in a wizard's ledger only because the wizard was a party. The bank holds it. The bank does not own it. Read me the goblin hand, not the wizard hand. I do not care yet what the wizard promised." Grivnak read the goblin hand. He read it in the old tongue, the way it had been cut, and then he read it in the trade tongue so that nothing would rest on his own translation, and he watched the old goblin's face while he did it. Ragnarok had a face like a shut vault, but Grivnak had spent 40 years reading small movements and things that did not want to be read, and he saw the exact moment the director understood the reckoning clause because the director's hand, which had been flat on the desk, closed. "Under the age of first magic," Ragnarok said. "Yes." "In want of guard." "Yes, Director." "And the last of the sworn blood is a boy of—" Ragnarok did not finish because he was doing the arithmetic that Grivnak had already done and arriving at the same intolerable sum. 5 years old, Grivnak said. 6 in the summer, by the birth record the bank holds for the vault key registration, placed by the guardianship clause with relatives who are not of our world and not of his. The vault sealed. No gold moving to his keeping, no steward appointed to his person, no one, and here Grivnak allowed himself one word that was not strictly a clerk's word, holding. Ragnarok sat with that for a while. When he spoke again, his voice had changed register, and Grivnak recognized the register, and something in his own chest, which he would have denied having, went still. It was the register a goblin used when he had stopped speaking as an individual and begun speaking as an office. "You know what this is," Ragnarok said. "I believe I do. Say it. Say it plainly, clerk, because in an hour you will say it to worse listeners than me, and I will not have you fumble it in front of the lore masters." Grivnak squared himself. An oath of the deep, sealed by the Undermoot, has come to its reckoning clause. The clause has, on the face of the record, been triggered. If it has truly been triggered, if the facts in the world match the facts in the oath, then the nation is bound, not the bank. The nation, and the debt is a ward, a living ward. A wizard child becomes, by the sworn word of every goblin who was, is, or will be, the ward of the whole deep, and who, Ragnarok said softly, may verify whether the facts in the world match the facts in the oath. The bank may not. It is not our oath to verify. Correct. Who, clerk? The lore masters of the Undermoot. The oath keepers. They will send an assessor, and the assessor will go to the child, and the assessor will look, and the assessor will not care in the smallest degree what any wizard says about it. Ragnarok showed his teeth. It was not a smile. Goblins did not smile the way wizards did, with a mouth as an apology. A goblin showed his teeth to tell you they were still there. "You have described the law correctly," the director said. "Now I will tell you the part that is not in the law, and you will carry it, because you are the one who dug this up, and the root does not let the finder walk away from the finding." He leaned forward. "Do you understand what it will mean for the nation to hold a wizard child?" "It will mean a great deal of trouble with the Ministry of Magic," Grivnak said. "It will mean," Ragnarok corrected, without heat, "that for the first time and longer than the statute of secrecy, the deep will stand between the wizarding world and one of its own children, and dare it to reach. Wizards have never in their history been made to understand that there is a floor beneath the floor. They think we keep their gold. They will learn that once, 91 years ago, a potter went down past the gold, past the vaults, past every place a wizard is permitted, all the way to the third gate, and knelt, and asked the nation for something no gold could buy, and that the nation, being what it is, and keeping what it keeps, said yes, and sealed it hot. He touched the black coin of wax with one clawed finger, not quite reverently, the way you touch a scar. They will hate it, they will call it theft and abduction and worse, and every word of it will bounce off the oath like water off slate, because the oath was sworn correctly, and we do not break what is sworn correctly, and that, clerk, is the whole of what we are. Gribnak said nothing. There was nothing to add. He had known Ragnarok for 30 years and had never heard him make a speech, and he understood that this had not been a speech but an instruction, the way a smith instructs by striking once, hard. So the apprentice hears the true note. What was the debt of the blood? Ragnarok asked. The wizard hand. What did the potter give, that the nation should swear so large a thing in return? Gribnak had read the wizard's hand 3 times, and had been waiting for this question, because it was the part of the story he found he could not be cold about, and he did not trust himself entirely. So he read it out rather than tell it. The wizard's hand said that in the 43rd year of the stewardship of Nagnok son of Nagnok, the salt vaults of the low deep had flooded, some pressure of the underground rivers, some failure of the old seals, and that in the flooding a great working of the goblins had been drowned, and 40 of the nation with it, 40 smiths and wardens trapped past a third gate where no wizard's magic could reach, and no wizard's law required a wizard to try, and that one wizard had tried. A potter, a warder of some skill and, the record noted dryly, no sense, who had been in the deep on the bank's business and who had gone back down into the rising water with the goblins rather than up the stairs with the wizards, and who had held a gate open with his own working alone past the point where his own life was the honest price of it, long enough for 30 of the 40 to come through before the water took the working and very nearly took him. He lived, Ragnarok said. It was not quite a question. He lived, barely. The record says the nation carried him up, and it says that when he could speak he did not ask for gold. The bank offered gold. He refused it. He asked instead for a thing to be sworn, and the stewards took it to the undermoot, because what he asked was too large for the bank, and the undermoot heard it, and, the goblin hand says this, not the wizard, the undermoot judged the debt true, a debt of the blood answered by a debt of the blood. He had spent his blood to hold a gate for the nation's children. He asked that if ever a child of his blood were left in want of guard, the nation would hold the gate for that child. And the nation, Ragnarok finished, because he had read ahead in Grivnak's face, swore it, sealed it hot, and filed it, and forgot it, because that is what you do with a debt you hope never comes due. He did not forget it, Grivnak said. It is in the ledger. It was read at every long audit for 91 years. Read, Ragnarok said, not heard. There is a difference, clerk, and you of all goblins should know it, because you are the first in 91 years to hear a thing that has been read 100 times. He rose. It took him a moment. He was old, and he did not pretend otherwise, which was one of the reasons goblins let him lead them. Come, we are going down. Down, director? To the lore masters. To the throat of the deep. You found it, you carry it, you stand for the finding. And Grivnak. Ragnarok paused at the door, and the flint-gray ridges of his brow drew together. When we are below, you will see things wizards are put to death for seeing. You have earned the seeing, by the finding. Do not waste it by being afraid of it. Ante. The bank had a bottom, for wizards. Gripopes and Bogrouds took the little carts rattling down past the dragon and the thief's downfall to the deep family vaults, and the wizards clutched their seats and thought they had been to the underworld, and came up again pale and proud, and told each other how far down Gringotts went. They had been perhaps a third of the way. Below the wizard vaults the cart rails ended, because the nation did not put a wizard where the nation lived. Ragnarok led Grivnak off the last platform through a door that was not a door until the director laid his palm against it, and spoke to it in the old tongue. A door of banded iron and older stone, and beyond it the air changed. Grivnak had been below the wizard line perhaps a dozen times in his career on the bank's deep business, and he had never gone past the second gate, and he knew from the change in the air that they were going past it now. It got warmer, not colder, which surprised wizards when they were told of it, and which no goblin found surprising at all, because the deep was not a cellar. It was a forge that had been burning since before there were wizards to be kept out of it. The stone underfoot went from cut block to living rock, worn smooth down the center of the passage by 10,000 years of goblin feet, and the smoothing was the loveliest thing Grivnak had ever put his own feet on. Because it was not decoration, it was use. And goblins loved use the way wizards loved gold. There were lights, but no torches. The deep lit itself. Veins of some ore in the rock caught a low, steady orange like banked coals, brighter where the passage narrowed, dimmer in the halls, and it did not flicker, and it threw no smoke, and Grivnak understood after a while that it was answering their footsteps, waking a little as they came and settling again behind them, so that they walked always in a soft-moving pool of firelight through a dark that was patient rather than empty. He did not ask how it was done. It would have been a wizard's question. You did not ask the deep how. You asked it whether you were permitted, and it told you by letting you pass. They palm. They palm, and sect, and fi mighty, you are rai mida. They pawns the antine, livery, but the real armor, plate that had been folded 1,000 times and forgot to shine, and they did not challenge Ragnok, but they looked at Grivnak, and one of them said something to the other in the old tongue too low and too fast for a ledger clerk to catch. And Grivnak understood that his own life had, in the last 3 hours, become a thing that were to smile it be. Would have a dod wotk. Grivnak had read descriptions of the halls of the deep. Every goblin had. They were in the songs. He had assumed, in the way of a clerk who deals all day in the difference between the stated value and the true one, that the songs exaggerated. He stood in the mouth of the first great hall and understood that the songs had lied in the other direction, that they had made it smaller than it was so that it could be sung about at all. The hall was not built. It had been persuaded. The rock had been coaxed, over ages, into a vault so high the orange light gave out before it reached the top, so that the ceiling was simply a warm darkness that might have been stone and might have been stone and might have been sky, and was in fact neither. Being older than the argument between them, columns came down out of that darkness, but they were not columns. They were the roots of the mountain, left where they had grown and only carved where carving improved on the growth, so that a natural pillar of ore-shot granite 40 feet around would, at the height of a goblin's eye, become for a stretch a frieze of the nation's history, and then, above, become root again and climb back up into the dark. The floor was a single sheet of something black and polished that held the light the way deep water holds the moon, and walking on it, Grivnak had the constant sense of walking on the surface of a great stillness with the whole weight of the world hanging under his feet. And he found, to his surprise, that this did not frighten him. It steadied him. A wizard would have felt small here. Grivnak felt held. There were goblins everywhere, and the hall swallowed them. Smiths at forges set into the base of the roots, the ring of their hammers coming back off the far dark a half-second late, so that every strike had its own ghost. Wardens in ranks doing the slow forms with weapons Grivnak had only seen in the vault inventories. Lore masters, robed not in a wizard's flowing robes, but in close-cut leather stiff with age and rank marks, moving between low tables of stone, where the true records lay. Not paper, never paper, but graven plates of metal. The nation's memory struck into a thing that would outlast fire. And children. That was the thing that undid Grivnak's composure, a little though he let none of it show. There were goblin children in the halls of the deep, small and quick and unfrightened, playing a running game between the roots with a set of iron counters, and one of them stopped to stare at the two strangers and stuck out her tongue at Grivnak with the total confidence of a creature who has never in her life been unsafe and was gone. That, Grivnak thought, that is what the oath promises the wizard boy, not gold. That. He stood a moment longer than Ragnok liked, watching the goblin children run their game between the roots, and he found himself doing a thing he had not done in years, which was to remember being small in this same hall. He had come down once as a child on the day his own grandmother was named to the tally rod, and he had run between these same roots and had never once, in all his running, wondered whether the roof would hold or the light would come or the horn would blow if he were lost, because those were not things a goblin child had to wonder. The deep held. It had always held. It had held so completely and so quietly that a child could spend his whole childhood not knowing he was being held, which was, Grivnak understood now, standing between the two halves of his life, the entire definition of a good childhood, and the exact thing the wizard boy had never once had. Somewhere up in the light there was a child who had spent every waking hour of 5 years wondering whether the roof would hold, and it had never held, not once. And the oath in the coffer under Grivnak's arm proposed to give that child the one thing Grivnak had been given without asking and without noticing. A floor he would not have to think about. Grivnak thought about it now, hard, so that the boy would not have to later. It was, he decided, a fair division of the labor. Come, Ragnok said, low. The lore masters have felt the seal, they always do. They are waiting. They were waiting. At the far end of the hall, where the roots came together into a kind of natural apse, 3 goblins sat at a table of black iron, and they were old in a way. Ragnok was not old. Old the way the columns were old. And Grivnak, who had spent his life being unimpressed by wealthy wizards and powerful ones, found that he had stopped some paces short of the table without deciding to. Ragnok had not stopped, and Grivnak made himself go on, and he set the coffer and the vellum and the master tally on the black iron table between his own hands, and he stepped back, and he waited to be spoken to. Because in this hall, a director of Gringotts was a functionary and a ledger clerk was less than that, and both of them knew it. And the knowing was not a humiliation, it was a relief. It was the correct size of things. The eldest of the 3 lore masters was a goblin so old the light seemed reluctant to touch her, as if it too gave way. Her name, Grivnak would learn, was Maragrind, and she was the keeper of the Undermoot's oaths, and she had kept them for longer than Gringotts had stood in Diagon Alley. She did not look at the coffer. She looked at Grivnak. You are the finder, she said. Her voice was quiet and it carried, which is a thing very old power can do and nothing else can. You read the deep script. I read it, keeper. Round your strokes? No, keeper. My grandmother would not permit it. Something moved in the ancient face. It might have been approval. It might have been the light. Good, Maragrind said. Then you did not misread it, and we need not spend 3 days deciding whether a clerk can be trusted to have found the end of the world in a ledger. She put out one hand, and it was all knuckle and old iron, and she did not touch the coffer. She held her palm above it, and the black seal in its bed of felt answered her. A small answering warmth Grivnak felt from 3 feet away, the wax remembering that it had been sealed hot. Maragrind closed her eyes. The blood ward of the third gate, she said. And it was not a question. And it was not to Grivnak. And it was not to Ragnok. She was speaking to the record graven in the iron of the table, or to the oath itself, or to the 91 dead years. Grivnak could not tell. I remember when it was sworn. I was young. I held the light at the third gate while the water went down and we counted who was left. 30 of 40. And the wizard on the stone, gray as a fish, would not take gold. She opened her eyes. I told the steward we should not swear so large a thing. A whole nation for one bloodline's misfortune. It was too much. It was intemperate. A dry sound came out of her, and it took Grivnak a moment to understand it was laughter. 90 years dry. The steward said to me, Maragrind, we do not measure a debt of the blood in gold, and we do not haggle a gate that a man held with his own life. And he was right, and I was wrong, and I have had 91 years to be wrong in, and now the debt has come due in my keeping, which is the root's little joke on those who counsel prudence. She looked at Ragnok. Director, the bank found it. The bank has done correctly to bring it. The bank's part is now finished. Do you understand me? I understand you, Keeper, Ragnok said, and inclined his head, and Grivnak saw that even the director of Gringotts bent here, and was not diminished by the bending, and filed the seeing away with the rest of what he had learned that would not fit in any ledger. Then he caught himself using the very phrase, filed it away, that his grandmother had beaten out of his hand, because it was a lazy phrase, a thing you said to avoid saying what you meant, and he made himself say what he meant, and he made himself say what he meant instead, silently, to no one. I will remember this until I die. The bank's part is finished, Maragrind repeated, but the finder's is not, because the root binds the finder to the finding, and I will not be the one to break the root on the very day the oath comes due. She turned the full weight of her ancient attention on Grivnak, and it was like standing under the hall's ceiling, like feeling the whole mountain patient overhead. Ledger clerk, what is your name? Grivnak, keeper of the House of Ledgers. My grandmother was Grivnak of the Tallyrod. Grivnak of the Tallyrod broke 3 of my apprentices' knuckles at a single audit and was right too, Maragrind said, and the dry laughter came again. So, the blood tells, Grivnak of the House of Ledgers, you found the oath, and by the root you will carry it to its reckoning, whether you have the stomach for it or not. Here is what the law requires, and you will not like all of it. The oath has a reckoning clause. On the face of the record, it is triggered, but an oath of the deep is not triggered by a record. It is triggered by the world, before the nation is bound, before we send wardens up into the light, before we set our whole word against the wizarding world, which we will do without a tremor if we must, but which we will not do on the strength of a wizard's paperwork. An assessor of the undermoot must go up, and stand before the child, and look, and judge whether the facts in the world match the facts in the oath. Is he under the age of first magic? Look at him. You will know. Is he in want of guard? Unfed, unwarded, given to hands that do not hold? Look at him. You will know that too, for a child cannot lie with his body the way his keepers lie with their mouths. And the assessor, Ragnok said very quietly, is to be the finder. The assessor is to be the finder, Maragrind agreed, because the root binds the finder to the finding, and because I am too old to climb into the light, and because I am too old to climb into the light, and because she showed her teeth, and hers were long and worn and entirely present, because a ledger clerk who does not round his strokes and does not haggle a debt of the blood is exactly the goblin I want standing in a wizard's kitchen, cold as a coin, judging whether nation of ours is about to change forever on account of one smite. You will go up, Grivnak. You will go quietly. You will take no wardens, because wardens in the light before the reckoning is proven would be the theft the wizards will accuse us of. You will go as a clerk of the bank, on the bank's ordinary business, and you will look at the child with the eyes the root gave you, and you will come back down and tell this table the truth, and then, only then, the nation will decide whether 91 years ago it promised more than it can bear to keep. The second loremaster spoke, and Grivnak had marked him already as the one to watch, because he had been running a set of iron reckoning counters through his fingers the whole time Maragrind spoke, and a goblin who counts while another talks is a goblin doing his own sum. His name was Vexrin, keeper of the reckonings, and his particular office was to weigh what the nation could afford in gold and in blood and in the harder currencies, and he had the sourness of every treasurer who has ever had to tell a hall of enthusiasts what a thing would cost. Before we send our clerk up the stairs to weep over a wizard's child, Vexrin said, and let the counters click. The reckonings will be heard, because the reckonings are always heard, and because someone at this table ought to say the unfashionable thing while Maragrind is busy being moved by her own memory. He did not look at Grivnak. He looked at the coffer, and the look was the look of a man pricing an ingot he suspects of being salted. An oath of the deep binds the whole nation. Good. Sworn correctly. Sealed hot. I do not dispute the instrument. I am not a fool, and I round no strokes either, but consider what the instrument does not say. It does not say the nation shall be beggared. It does not say the nation shall go to war with the Ministry of Magic, and yet the moment we stand between the wizards and one of their own, war is what the wizards will call it, and a treasurer must ask, what does the oath require, exactly? And not 1 grain more. Does it require we love the boy? No. Does it require we spend the nation's whole standing in the light for him? It does not. It requires that we guard him. Guard, keeper. There are cheaper guards than a nation's open war. Say the cheaper guard aloud, Vexrin, Marigraine said, without turning her head, so that the finder may hear how a reckoning sounds when it is trying to keep a promise on the cheap. Vexrin was not embarrassed. Treasurers do not embarrass. It is the first thing they have removed. Gold, he said. We are a bank. We buy the boy out of the bad hands. We settle a keeping price on some fostering, wizard or otherwise, warded to our standard, paid from a fund the oath itself would justify. And we are quit of it. Honestly quit, the letter of the debt discharged, and no warden ever climbs a stair in the daylight for a ministry to photograph. The counters clicked. The oath says the child is the nation's ward. It does not say the child must be among the nation. A ward can be kept at a distance, and kept well. I have kept 3 that way, and buried none. There was a silence, and in it Grivnak heard the far ghost strike of the smith's hammers coming back off the dark. And he understood that this was a real question, and not a piece of theater, and that the whole night now turned on whether a ledger clerk could answer a keeper of the reckonings on the keeper's own ground, which was money. Which was, as it happened, precisely Grivnak's ground too. He did not wait to be invited. That would have been a clerk's mistake, and the lore masters would have marked the wait as weakness. He spoke. Keeper of the reckonings, Grivnak said, you have priced the wrong item. Vexrin's counters stopped. You have priced the guard, Grivnak went on, cold and even, the audit voice, the voice that told a red-faced wizard exactly why his account was short and did not care that he was red-faced. The guard is cheap. You are right. There are cheaper guards than open war, and if the oath had said, guard, I would carry your gold up the stairs myself and be glad of the short walk. But the oath does not say guard. I read the deep script. I did not round it. The oath says the child is the nation's ward until the ward be no longer a child. Ward, keeper. Not guarded. Ward, and a ward is not a thing you buy at a distance and visit twice a year. A ward is a member of the household. The word in the old tongue is the same word we use for the smith's apprentice, who eats at the smith's table, and is beaten by the smith's own hand, and inherits the smith's own grudges. It is the household word. The dead man did not ask us to guard his blood. He knew what guarding was worth. He had done our guarding for us at a gate, in the dark, and it cost him nearly everything. He asked for the thing that no gold buys and no distance keeps. He asked that his blood be of the household. And the undermoot heard the word he used and swore to the word he used and sealed it hot. You cannot discharge a household debt with a keeping price keeper, any more than you could discharge your own daughter by settling a fund on a stranger to raise her fondly. The letter you would keep is not the letter that is written. I have read the letter. It says, Ward. Vexrin looked at him for a long moment. Then the sour old face did something Grivnak had not expected. It approved, not warmly. Vexrin did nothing warmly, but a treasurer who has been correctly outreckoned has a particular way of setting down his counters, laying them flat, conceding the board, and Vexrin laid them flat. The clerk reads, Vexrin said to Marigraine, and it was as close to a blessing as his office allowed. Very well, it is the household word. I withdraw the keeping price. It was beneath the instrument, and I knew it when I said it, and I said it anyway because a reckoning that is never wrong is a reckoning no one troubles to check. The debt is a ward of the household, and the household is the deep, and the cost. The sourness came back, but honest now, resigned to a true price rather than fighting a false one. The cost will be everything I feared, and I will pay it out to the last coin, because the alternative is a nation whose word can be settled cheap, and a nation whose word can be settled cheap, and a nation whose word can be settled cheap is bankrupt in the only currency that matters. Send the clerk up, keeper. He'll do. He costs us nothing, and he reads. The third lore master had not spoken at all, and Grivnak had almost forgotten there were 3, because the third sat so still and was so scarred and had the particular stillness of a creature that has spent its life at gates. This was Dolgruth, keeper of the gates, oldest warden of the nation, who had held the third gate himself in his youth and had, the song said, been the one to carry the gray, half-drowned wizard up out of the low deep 91 years ago with his own arms. When he spoke, his voice was ruined. A gate voice, wrecked by 90 years of shouting orders into rising water, and the hall seemed to lean in to hear it. I carried him, Dolgruth said. That was all at first. The wizard. When the working failed and the water took the gate and he went under, I went in after, because he had held our gate, and you do not leave it a gate, the one who held it. I brought him up. He weighed nothing. The water had wrung him out. And when he could speak, I was there. at the third gate, when he could speak. The stewards asked him what he would have, and he did not ask for himself. He was dying, and he did not ask for himself. He asked for a child who did not yet exist. The ruined voice did not shake. Gay voices do not shake. They have shouted through worse. I have waited 91 years to find out whether the nation meant what it swore at my gate, whether we are gatekeepers or only gold keepers, and now a ledger clerk has climbed down out of the daylight to tell me that debt has come due, and a treasurer has tried to buy it off and been outread, and the keeper of oaths sends the finder up alone into the light. He turned his scarred head slowly and looked at Grivnak, and his eyes in the coal light were very old and entirely without sentiment. Clerk, when you stand in front of that child, if the facts in the world match the facts in the oath, if he is small and hungry and unheld, you will want to bring him down at once, in your arms, the way I brought his blood up out of the water. You will want it more than you have ever wanted anything, and you will not know why, because you are a ledger clerk and you do not, as a rule, want things. Do not do it. Not yet. Come back down and tell the table the truth, plainly, and let the nation stand up in its own time and its own order, because a word taken in haste is a word taken like a theft, and my gate was not held so that 91 years later we could look like thieves. Bring me the truth, clerk. The nation will bring the child. He settled back into his stillness. That is the counsel of the gates. It is heard, said Maragrind, and it is right, and it is the last word this table needs. She rose, which she had not done for the director and did not do lightly, and the two other lore masters rose with her, and Grivnak understood he was being dismissed by the whole Undermoot at once, which was an honor a ledger clerk would ordinarily receive, perhaps never. Grivnak, of the House of Ledgers, you have been outreckoned by no one, and you have outread the reckonings, and you have heard the counsel of the gates. The finding is yours to carry. Go up in the morning. Look with the eyes the root gave you. Come down with the truth. And clerk, the ancient face turned to him one final time, when you are standing in the wizard's clean, bright kitchen, and it is very far from here, and there is no coal light, and no roots overhead, and no hammers in the dark, and you begin to doubt that any of this is real. Put your hand flat on whatever is under your feet, and remember that the mountain is under it. All the way down, patient, and the nation is in the mountain, and the oath is in the nation, and every part of it is holding, and you are the part of it, is holding, today. Now. Go. Grivnak stood in the warm, patient dark under the roots of the mountain, with the black seal cooling again in its coffer, and he understood that his life had been, until 3 hours ago, a small and orderly thing, and that it was not going to be small or orderly again, and that somewhere above him, up past the second gate and the wizard vaults in the marble hall and the whole thickness of the earth, in the ordinary daylight of the ordinary boy, who did not know that a nation had been sworn to him before he was born, and did not know that a goblin was coming to look at him and barbally den, but not at Enquat. I will go, Grivnak said. I know you will, said Maragrind. The root already knows. It only waited for you to say it. She lowered her knuckled hand over the coffer one last time, and the seal warmed and settled and went cold. Go and sleep, finder. Tomorrow you climb into the light, and you had better be rested, because you are about to see a thing worse than any wizard could show you down here. You are about to see what the wizards do to their own when they think no one is keeping the account. Aki. Grivnak did not sleep. He went back up the smooth passages with a warden to see him to the second gate, and up the dark stairs past the empty cart rails, and into a clerk's cell in the bank's lower quarters where he kept a cot for audit season. And he lay on the cot in the wizard dark, which flickered because the bank's upper reaches were lit with the wizard's cold blue fire that knew nothing of coals. And he did not sleep. He was not afraid. He had told Marogrind's table the truth, and he had meant it. But he was a goblin who lived in numbers, and there was an arithmetic running under his composure that he could not stop, and the arithmetic went, 1 child and a whole nation. He turned it over. A wizard would have found it grand. A wizard would have made a song of it already. The small boy and the great host, the underdog, raised up. Grivnak found it on the ledger, unbalanced, and the unbalance nagged at him the way a tally that came out a nut short nagged at him, and he lay in the dark and let it nag, because his grandmother had taught him that a good clerk does not silence the nag. He follows it to the error, and somewhere past the middle of the night he followed it, and it was not an error. The oath was not 1 child against a whole nation. The oath was a whole nation deciding, 91 years ago in cold blood, at the third gate, that a child of the sworn blood was worth the whole nation's word. Not because the child was grand, but because the man had held the gate, and the nation kept its gates, and a nation that would not answer for 1 small child in want was a nation whose word about anything was worth exactly nothing. The account balanced. It balanced perfectly. The value on the wizard's side of the ledger was not the boy. It was the nation's own word. They had not overpaid. They had bought the only thing a nation cannot forge, which is the belief in every goblin child playing between the roots that the deep holds what it swears to hold, all the way down, without haggling, even when it is inconvenient, even when it is a wizard, even 91 years late. Grivnak lay in the flickering wizard dark and understood, at last and completely, what he was carrying, and only then did the thing happen that he had refused to let happen in front of the lore masters. It was not fear. He examined it carefully, the way he examined everything, and it was not fear. It was something closer to the feeling of a very long sum coming out exactly even after a whole day of work. A hard, clean rightness that had no name in the trade tongue and did not need one. Then he thought of the boy whom he had not yet seen, 5 years old, 6 in the summer, in the hands that did not hold, not knowing, and the hard, clean rightness turned into something with an edge on it, and Grivnak, who did not as a rule permit himself the luxury of wanting things, found that he wanted, very much and very simply, to go up into the light and put himself between that child and whatever the wizards had left him to, and he recognized the want for what it was, and he did not file it away, and he did not name it, because to name it would be to make it smaller than it was. He got up before the wizard bells, and he dressed in a clerk's plain black, and he took the bank's ordinary satchel and put nothing extraordinary in it, because he was going up as a clerk on ordinary business, and he stood for a moment at the little window of his cell that looked out on nothing but the shaft of the great stair, and he said, quietly, in the deep script's tongue, to the mountain under his feet and the 81 years and the dead man who had held the gate, the oldest promise the deep knew, the one every warden said, stepping into the dark, what is sworn is held, what is held is kept, what is kept does not fall. Then Grivnak of the House of Ledgers went to find a wizard child, and the reckoning began to climb toward the light. Chapter 1. End. Chapter 2. The Summons Number 4, Privet Drive, had been built to be exactly like its neighbors and had succeeded so completely that a stranger could stand at the mouth of the street and be unable to say which house he wanted. And this was the whole ambition of the place. And it had been achieved. Grivnak stood at the mouth of the street a little after 9 in the morning and had no such trouble. He could see the ward. Not the wizard's ward. That too, a thin, cold membrane of old magic laid over the whole house and thinning as it went, a blood protection, competent and loveless, the sort of thing a powerful wizard sets and does not maintain. Grivnak read it the way he read a signature, without effort and without admiration. It kept a certain kind of enemy out. It did nothing whatever about the enemy already inside, which was, Grivnak reflected, the trouble with most wizard magic and most wizards. They warded the door and never once looked at the table. What Grivnak saw, that no wizard on the street could have seen, was the older thing. He had not expected it, and he stood still on the pavement to be sure of it. There was a second ward on the house, or not a ward, a thread, so fine it was nearly nothing, running out of the earth under the front step and up over the threshold, and it was not wizard work at all. It was Goblin. It was 91 years old and worn to a filament, and it had found the child anyway, the way water finds the crack, and Grivnak understood with a small, cold shock that the oath had not been sleeping. It had been reaching. All this time, across the whole thickness of England, the blood ward of the third gate had been paying out one thread of itself toward the last of the sworn blood. Too thin to guard, too thin to do anything at all except one thing, which was to know exactly where the child was, so that on the day the debt came due the nation would not have to go looking. You waited, Grivnak said to the thread, quietly, in the deep script's tongue, and the thread did not answer, because it was not a person, but it warmed under his attention the way the black seal had warmed under Marrowgrind's hand, and Grivnak took his hand off the low garden wall where he had set it and straightened his plain black clerk's coat and went to do his work. He had a pretext, and it was a good one, because a good pretext is true. Gringotts had, that very morning, a genuine and boring piece of business at number 4, a dormant account notification, the sort of dust-dry letter the bank sent once a decade to the registered muggle guardians of a magical minor, confirming the existence of a trust, requiring a signature, promising nothing. Grivnak had drawn it himself before dawn, on the bank's true paper, with the bank's true seal. Every word of it accurate, because he was going to stand in a wizard-hating household as a goblin, which was conspicuous enough, and he would not compound it by carrying a lie a clerk could disprove. He would carry the truth and let the truth be dull. Dull was the best disguise in the world. He rang the bell. There was a considerable delay, and through the frosted glass of the door Grivnak watched a large shape resolve and grow and stop, and he heard, muffled, a voice that had been pitched pleasant for the neighbors and dropped something over the last 3 words. Can't imagine who at this. The door opened on the width of the chain. The woman who looked out was long and pale and built for looking over fences, and she looked down at Grivnak, and Grivnak watched her face do the thing that wizard-adjacent people's faces did when they saw a goblin. The flinch, the fast recovery, the arrangement of features into a mask that thought itself unreadable, and was, to Grivnak, a ledger printed in large type. She had recognized what he was. That told him she knew about the magical world, knew enough to fear it, which the file had implied and her face confirmed. Good. It meant he would not have to explain himself. It meant, also, that everything unpleasant in this house was chosen and not ignorant, and Grivnak set that on the slab of his mind and went on. Mrs. Dursley, he said. Not a question. I am from Gringotts, the bank. He held up the letter so the seal showed, and he watched her eyes go to the seal and understand it and hate it. There is a signature required, on a dormant trust registered to a minor in your household. It is a formality. It will take a very few minutes of your time, and then I will trouble you no further. There's no, she began, and then stopped, because there's no minor here. was a lie so large that even she could see it would not survive the letter in his hand, and Grivnik watched her recalculate, watched her decide that the fastest way to be rid of a goblin on her doorstep in full view of Privet Drive was to let him in, sign whatever the dreadful little creature wanted, and shut the door on the whole business. She unhooked the chain. "You'd better come in off the step," she said in the voice for the neighbors, and stood back the exact minimum distance, and Grivnak stepped into the hall of number 4, and the 91-year-old Dread ran under his feet and up the wall beside him, humming, glad, and he did not let his face show that he could feel it. The hall was very clean. That was Grivnak's first true reading of the house, and it was worse than dirt would have been. Dirt is neglect. This was attention, correctly aimed away. There were photographs up the stairwell, a boy and everyone, a large pink boy at every age, birthdays and beaches and a small bicycle, dozens of him. And there was no other child in any frame, not one. And a house that photographs one child in any frame, not one. And a house that photographs one child and not the other is a house that has done its accounting and posted the result on the wall. Grivnik walked past the wall of the wanted boy and said nothing. "In here," Mrs. Dursley said, and put him in the front room, the good room, the room for people you wanted gone quickly, and did not offer him tea, which he had not wanted and noted anyway, because the small cruelties were the ones that told the truth. The large ones, a house learned to hide. He had meant to be quick. He had meant to produce the letter, obtain the signature, decline the tea he would not be offered, and use the 4 minutes it took to look. Because the reckoning was a looking, Marrowgrind had said, "Look at him. You will know. And then leave. And take his looking down into the deep." He had rehearsed it. He was a clerk. He rehearsed everything. Then the boy came to the door of the front room because a child of 5 cannot bear a stranger in the house and stay away. And Grivnak looked at him, and every rehearsed thing went out of Grivnak's head at once and did not come back. He was small. That was the first fact, and Grivnik, who dealt in facts, made himself take it plainly and not soften it and not sharpen it. The boy was small in the way that is not the same as young. Grivnak had seen goblin children an hour ago running between the roots, and they had been small, and this was a different smallness. The smallness of a thing that has not been given quite enough to grow the whole way, and a clerk who has weighed a great many true and false ingots knows the difference between light and hollow at a glance. The boy was hollow light, his wrists. Grivnak looked at his wrists, because you cannot dress a wrist to lie, and the wrists told him. The clothes were enormous. They were the pink boy's clothes, obviously, gray with washing, cinched and rolled and still swallowing him, and that too was a ledger posted on a wall. He is given what the other has finished with, and only that. His hair was black and would not lie down. His eyes were green and very awake. The awakeness of a child who has learned that the room is safest when you are watching it. And behind the round taped-together spectacles, those eyes came into the front room and found the goblin and did not flinch. That was the thing. He did not flinch. Mrs. Dursley had flinched. The boy looked at a goblin, at a small, fierce, inhuman creature in black with long fingers and long teeth, at a thing out of a story that ought to have sent a 5-year-old behind the sofa, and he was curious. His whole hollow light little body leaned a half-inch into the room, toward the strangeness, because the strangeness was interesting, and he had, Grivnak understood, so very little that was interesting. "Boy," said Mrs. Dursley, in a low, fast voice, not meant for the front room. "Kitchen. Now." And the boy went, but he went slowly, sideways, keeping the goblin in view the whole way, and at the door he stopped, because curiosity in a 5-year-old is stronger than fear and very nearly stronger than obedience. And he asked, in a clear, light, unbothered voice, the blunt, terrible question of the small, "Are you a goblin?" "Boy, I am," Grivnak said before the woman could get the child out of the room, because he had come a very long way up out of the dark to look at this child, and he was not going to let 4 minutes and a large frightened woman rob him of the child's own voice. "My name is Grivnak. I read about goblins," the boy said. The words came out in a rush now, the whole horde of them, everything he knew, offered to the one interesting thing that had ever come to the door, in a book at school. "They live under the ground, and they make things out of metal, and they are very clever with numbers." He said very clever with numbers with enormous respect. The respect of a child for whom numbers were a locked door. "Is that true?" "Every word," Grivnak said. "Boy." And this time it was not the woman. A heavier voice, a man's, come from the kitchen, and the boy's whole body did a thing Grivnak would remember for the rest of his life. A flinch that was not a flinch of the face, because the face had learned not to, but of everything under the face, a fast, full body settling of the shoulders inward and down, the exact motion of a creature making itself smaller, because smaller had been found, by experiment, to be safer. He had learned it the way Grivnak had learned the deep script, young, by the rod, until it was under the skin, and Grivnik, who did not as a rule want things, felt the want come up in him like heat off a forge, and remembered Dolgruth's ruined gate voice. "You will want to bring him down at once, in your arms. Do not do it, not yet," and held. "Go to your aunt," Grivnak said to the boy, gently, in a voice he did not know he had. "It is all right, I will still be here." The boy looked at him. "I will still be here," and something moved behind the green eyes. some small recalibration, because grown people who came to that house did not, as a rule, promise a child they would still be there. And then he went, small and swallowed by gray clothes, into the kitchen, where the heavy voice was. And Grivnak was left in the good room with Mrs. Dursley and the wall of the wanted boy, and the reckoning was, in every way that mattered, already finished. He had come to look. He had looked. He knew. But the law was the law, and a clerk finished his forms. The signature, Grivnak said, and put the letter and a pen on the good room's polished table, and his voice had gone back to the audit voice. Flat and cold and giving nothing, and Mrs. Dursley, who had been braced for anger and did not know what to do with cold, signed it faster than she needed to have him gone. Grivnak blotted it and folded it and put it in the bank's ordinary satchel. And then he did a thing that was not on any form, because there was one fact left that a good assessor confirms with his own senses and does not take on inference. The child eats with the family, Grivnak said. It was not a question, but he made it lie in the air like one, and he watched her. Of course he does, Mrs. Dursley said, too quickly, and her hand went, without her telling it to, a small, betraying inch toward the hall, toward a low door under the stairs that Grivnak had marked coming in without knowing yet what it was. A little door with a bolt on the outside, and a bolt on the outside of a door is a fact that requires no inference at all. And Grivnak looked at the bolt, and looked at the woman, and let her watch him look, and said nothing, because there are silences that do more work than a summons, and this was one, and he spent it, and then he hit. And then which hit it on the step he turned. He had one more thing to do, and it was not for the woman, though she would carry it. He had to be sure the boy heard, because a summons in Goblin law must be witnessed, and the most important witness, the one the wizards would never think to count, was the ward himself. Boy, Grivnak said, not loudly, but pitched to carry down the clean hall to the kitchen. Harry. A silence in the kitchen. Then the small sound of the boy coming to the kitchen door. Not into the hall, not daring that, but to the doorway, where Grivnak could just see him. A pale shape and two round taped spectacles and the green awake eyes. You were right, Grivnak told him. About goblins. Every word in your book was true. We live under the ground, and we make things out of metal, and we are very clever with numbers. He paused and put into the pause the whole weight of what he was, though the boy could not know it yet, and we keep our accounts, all of them, however old. He inclined his head, a thing he had not done for Mrs. Blaine. Dursley would not do for her husband, a courtesy a goblin pays an equal or a lord. Good morning, Harry Potter. Then Grivnak went down the neat path and out of the neat gate and down Privet Drive without hurrying, because a goblin does not hurry, and behind him the door of number 4 shut hard, and under his feet, all the way to the mouth of the street and beyond, the 91-year-old thread ran with him through the earth, humming, no longer alone. I. He did not go straight down. There was a protocol, and Grivnak followed it, because the protocol existed for exactly this hour. The hour between the looking and the telling, when an assessor's own heart is the least trustworthy instrument he owns. Marrowgreen did send him up alone precisely so that no warden's fury and no smith's pity would color the reckoning. And Grivnak, climbing back toward London with the reckoning in him like a swallowed coal, understood the wisdom of it, and hated it, and obeyed it. He did not run to the deep. He went to the bank, to the marble hall, to his own cell, and he sat down at a reckoning slab with clean parchment, and he wrote the assessment. He wrote it in the deep script, because it was the nation's business, and he wrote it the way his grandmother had taught him. No rounded strokes, no soft words, every finding a fact, and every fact provable. He wrote, the ward is under the age of first magic, confirmed by direct observation. No evidence of accidental magic in the household, which fears it and would report it. He wrote, the ward is in want of guard. And then, because want of guard was a conclusion and not a fact, and the lore masters would strip a conclusion to its facts and rebuild it and see whether it stood, he wrote the facts, one under another, cold in the small hard runes, and each one was worse than the last precisely because he did not let himself soften it. The ward is hollow light. Wrists confirm insufficient feeding over a sustained period. Not illness, not accident. The ward is clothed in the discards of another child. Nothing provided him is provided for him. The household photographs one child in 40 frames, and this child in none. The door under the stairs bolts from the outside. The ward, at the sound of the man's voice, made himself smaller by trained reflex, in the manner of a creature that has learned by repetition that smallness is safer. This reflex is not taught in a day. It is not taught in a month. The ward looked at a goblin and did not fear it. He feared the kitchen. Grivnak set down the reckoning pen and looked at what he had written, and it was the coldest thing he had ever written, and the truest. And he understood that he had done exactly what the law required, and that the doing of it had cost him something he had not known he had to spend. His grandmother had told him, at the tally rod, that the reason a clerk does not round his strokes is that the world is already trying to lie to you, all the time, in every direction, and the strokes are the last true thing, and if you round them, you have joined the world in the lie. He had not rounded a stroke. He had written hollow light and bolts from the outside and made himself smaller by trained reflex, and every one of them would stand before the Undermoot, and none of them could be haggled, and the boy who was the ward of the whole deep and did not know it would never read them. And Grivnik found that he wanted the boy never read them and to have them true forever in the nation's iron, both at once, and did not try to reconcile the two, because some sums do not come out even, and to have them true forever in the nation's iron, both at once, and did not try to reconcile the two. Now to pitoy the two hone your ability could quap. There was one more thing to write, and it was not a finding, and Grivnak hesitated over it, because it was not a clerk's business to record what he wanted. And then he wrote it anyway, small, at the foot of the plate, below the facts, where the lore masters would see it and know it for what it was. He asked me whether I was a goblin. He had read a book. He was glad the book was true. There was no one in that house glad of anything he knew. I record this not as a finding, but as the finder's word. The debt is true, and it is worse than the oath imagined, and I ask the Undermoot to be quick. Then Grivnak of the House of Ledgers took his cold true reckoning, and went down out of the light, past the wizard vaults and the empty cart rails in the first gate and the second, into the warm patient dark where the nation lived, to summon a whole people to the keeping of one small, hollow light boy who had made himself smaller at the sound of a voice, and had leaned, anyway, a half-inch toward the one interesting thing that had ever come to his door. The Undermoot did not meet the way wizards met, with a chairman and a minute book and a show of hands. It met the way of forged lights. Something was set in the middle of it, and the nation gathered around the thing, and the heat rose, and out of the heat came a decision that had the shape of the thing that had been set in the middle. What Grivnak set in the middle of the Undermoot was his reckoning plate, laid on the black iron table under the roots, and around it the lore masters gathered, and behind the lore masters, in the great hall, the nation gathered, because a summons of the whole deep is not done in a small room, and word had run down the passages all day, the way word runs in a place where the walls carry sound, and no one has ever needed to write a memorandum. The finder has come down. The oath is child, and tonight the Undermoot decides within 91 years. Marrowgrind read the reckoning plate aloud. She read it in the old tongue, into a hall gone so quiet that the far forges had banked their fires so as not to strike a note across it, and Grivnak stood by the table and watched the nation hear the thing that had until now only been read. He watched Olgruth, keeper of the gates, at the word hollow light, close his ruined hand on the table's edge until the old scars whitened. He watched Vexrin, keeper of the reckonings, at the words nothing provided him is provided for him, set down his counters and not pick them up again. Because a treasurer who has argued for a keeping price does not need the words twice to understand that a keeping price would have been a wall built around an empty room. He watched. At the door under the stairs, bolts from the outside, a sound go through the whole hall. Not a gasp. Goblins do not gasp, but a loathing. A shift. The sound a forge makes when the bellows draw. And Grivnik understood that he was watching a nation catch fire. Marrowgrind read the finder's word last, the part at the foot of the plate that was not a finding, and when she came to I asked the Undermoot to be quick, she did not read on, because there was no more, and she set the plate down, and she looked out over the hall, over the lore masters and the wardens and the smiths, and, at the back, held up on shoulders to see, the goblin children, the ones who had never in their lives been unsafe, and she said, into the enormous listening dark, the formal thing, the old thing, the question that opened a whale deep, the oath of the third gate has come due. The finder has looked, and found the facts of the world to match the facts of the oath. And I, keeper of the oaths, affirm the finding. The debt is a ward. The ward is a child. The child is of the household, and the household is the deep. She lifted her knuckled old hand. Nation of the deep, do we keep what was sworn? And the nation answered. It did not answer in words at first. It answered the way the deep answered everything, with iron. Every warden in the hall drew in one motion the short heavy blades of the deep and struck them once against the black iron of their own armor. One strike, and the strike came back off the unseeable ceiling a half-second late, and then again. And the smiths took it up on their anvils, and the whole was one slow, enormous heartbeat of struck iron, and under it, threaded through, the voices came, Erbrate strigat, and dun undid and urenbo up. What is sworn is held. What is held is kept. What is kept does not fall. Grivnak stood by the table with his cold true reckoning and let the iron heartbeat go through him. And he thought of the boy in the swallowing gray clothes leaning a half-inch toward the door, and he did not, this time, hold the want down, because there was no longer any reason to. The nation had risen. The reckoning was affirmed. What he had wanted alone in a wizard's clean front room, ashamed of wanting it, the whole deep now wanted with him, in iron, out loud, and a want that a whole nation has taken up is no longer a private weakness. It is a summons. Marrowgrind let the iron ring until it had set everything, and then she raised her hand again, and the hall came down to silence by degrees, the way a struck bell comes down, and into the last of it she spoke the thing that turned a decision into a law. Then it is affirmed and it is sworn again, and the second swearing is the nation's own and no wizard's asking. Hear the order of it, for we will do this in the deep's own order and not in haste, because a ward taken in haste is a ward taken like a theft. and this ward will not be a theft. It will be a claim, made in the light by the whole deep, that no wizard's court can unmake, because it was sworn correctly, 91 years before any of them thought to object. She turned to Grivnak. Finder, you carry the finding. You will carry the summons. On the morrow you go up again into the light, not to the child's house. The child is not summoned, the child is claimed, and one does not summon what one is already sworn to hold. You go to the wizards who filed the guardianship. You go to the ministry that let a warded child of a warded house be given to hands that do not hold, and you will deliver to them, in the old form, on the nation's true iron, the summons of the undermoot, that the deep has recognized a debt of the blood, that the last of the sworn blood is, from this hour, the ward of the whole nation, and that the wizarding world will surrender the keeping of the child to the deep, or the deep will come and keep him. And either way the child will be kept, because that is what it was, and we knew not break height. Let them convene their court. Let them summon their chief warlock and their minister, and whatever else they keep in their bright rooms. We are content to stand before all of it. We have been ready for 91 years. They have had 1 day. She lowered her hand, and the reckoning was law, and the summons was written that night into the nation's iron by the lore master's own hands, so that it could never after be said the deep had acted in a passion or in the dark. And at the foot of it, below the ancient formal clauses, by Marogrind's own instruction and against every custom of the lore masters, they graved one line that was not law, because the keeper of oaths had decided that this, once the iron would carry a finder's word into the Lythit. The word asked whether the goblin in his kitchen was real. Tell the wizards, he is real, and so are we, and so are the oath, and the boy will never again be the only one in the house glad of a true thing. ISAS. The summons of the undermoot did not go to the wizarding world by owl. Grivnak had asked about that, the next morning, standing in the lore master's apse while Marogrind pressed the nation's true iron into his hands. A plate, not a letter, a handspan of black metal graven on both faces, and warm from the striking, heavy enough that a wizard would have needed both arms, and Grivnak carried in one, because a goblin carries his own law and does not stagger under it. He had asked whether an owl would not be faster. Marogrind had shown her teeth. An owl, she had said, is how a wizard tells another wizard a thing he wishes to be able to deny having said. The deep does not send its law by a bird it does not own, to be dropped on a mat and lost under a bill. Our law walks in on its own feet, in the daylight, in front of witnesses, and is set down on the wizard's own table, by a hand that will still be attached to the finder when the wizards have finished reading, so that there can never be a question of what was delivered, or when, or to whom, or by what right. You will carry it in, Grivnak. You will set it down. You will say the words, and you will stand there, small and cold and entirely alone in a room full of the most powerful wizards in Britain, and you will not take it back, and you will not soften it, and you will not leave until they have understood that it is theirs now, and cannot be unread. She had closed his fingers over the warm iron with her own knuckled hand. That is how the deep serves a summons. On foot. In the light. Once. So Grivnak went up into the light a third time, and this time he did not go to Privet Drive, and he did not go by the ordinary door of the bank. He went by the deep way that surfaced, by ancient right, not in Diagon Alley, but in the marble bowels of the Ministry of Magic itself, in a corridor most wizards did not know existed. A corridor the goblins had built when the ministry was built, because a bank that keeps a nation's gold does not let the nation forget it has a road under the floor. Grivnak came up out of the Goblin Road into a low cold hall of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, in his plain black clerk's coat, carrying a plate of graven iron in one hand, and the two duty wizards at the desk looked up and saw a goblin where no goblin should be, and one of them reached, by trained reflex, for his wand. I would not, Grivnak said, reach for that in front of what I am carrying. It is the law of the deep, and it is watching, and it does not care for your wand. He set the plate on the duty desk with a weight that made both wizards look at it and nod at him. I'm a herald of the undermoot of the Goblin Nation. I am here to serve a summons upon the Wisengamot, the chief warlock, and the minister for magic. You will take me to someone with the authority to receive it, or you will fetch that someone here, and you will do one of those two things now, because a herald of the deep is not kept waiting on a bench, and I promise you that the wizard who keeps me waiting will be the first name in a story none of you want to be in. They fetched someone. The someone they fetched was a woman named Griselda Marchbanks, no, Grivnak, who had read every relevant file the bank held on the ministry's people before he climbed, corrected himself as she came down the corridor. This was not Marchbanks, but the head of the Wisengamot Administration Services, a witch called Perpetua Wick, 60 years in the ministry and made entirely of procedure, the sort of official who had outlasted 11 ministers by never once being interesting enough to remove. She came down the cold corridor at a measured pace. And she looked at the goblin, and she looked at the iron on the desk, and Grivnak watched her do the thing that told him she was dangerous. She did not flinch, and she did not reach for a wand, and she did not summon guards. She filed him. Her eyes went over him and over the iron with the flat cataloging attention of a creature calculating exactly how much trouble had just walked into her building and precisely where would have to be routed, and Grivnak recognized the look, because it was his own look, the audit look, and he understood that the ministry had, by luck or by long habit, sent to meet the law of the deep, the one wizard in the building capable of receiving it correctly. "You are from Gringotts," Perpetua Wick said. It was a question shaped as a statement, the mirror of Grivnak's own trick, and Grivnak marked it and respected it. "I am from below Gringotts," he said. "The bank is a house of the nation. I do not come on the bank's business. I come on the nation's." "There is a difference, madam, and by the end of this hour it will be the only difference that matters to you." "Explain the difference." She did not sit. There was nowhere to sit. They were standing in a cold corridor over a plate of iron, and she did not send for a room because a wizard of her experience knew that a matter conducted in a corridor was a matter not yet officially happening, and she wanted to know what it was before she let it start to officially happen. Grivnak respected that too. "The bank keeps your gold," Grivnak said. "The nation keeps its word. 91 years ago the nation gave its word, the whole nation, sealed by the Undermoot, sworn at the third gate of the deep, to a wizard of the House of Potter, in a matter of a debt of the blood. That word has, by its own terms, come due. I am here to inform the Wizengamot, the chief warlock, and the minister, that from this hour the last living child of that blood is the sworn ward of the entire Goblin nation, and to require the surrender of his keeping to the deep." He laid one long finger on the warm iron. "It is written here in our law, which is older than your ministry and will outlast it. I am instructed to set it down before your highest authority, to say the words of the summons, and to remain until it is understood. I have said the difference, madam. The bank would send you a letter about gold. The nation has sent you a herald about a child. Root me accordingly." For a long moment Perpetua Wick said nothing, and Grivnak watched the calculation run behind her flat old eyes, and he could nearly read the columns of it, because they were the columns he would have run himself. A goblin, a herald, not a clerk. He has used the word herald, which has a meaning in the old treaties, which means the statute concessions apply, which means I cannot simply have him removed. A ward, the Potter Child. The Potter Child is Dumbledore's business. Everyone knows the Potter Child is Dumbledore's business, though no one is supposed to know where. And if the goblins have found the child, then the placement Dumbledore swore was secret is not secret, and that is a crack in a very great wizard's wall, and I am now standing over the crack, a debt of the blood sworn at the third gate. I do not know what that is, which means it is old, which means it is Goblin treaty law, which means the Department of International Magical Cooperation and probably 3 dead treaties, and if I mishandle it, I will be the official who started a Goblin war over a filing error. She arrived, Grivnak saw, at the correct conclusion, which was the cautious one, and she arrived at it fast, which was why she had outlasted 11 ministers. "I will not receive this," Perpetua Wick said. Grivnak's finger did not move from the iron, and she saw it, and she went on. "Alone and in a corridor, herald, which is not a refusal, and you know it is not. A summons of this weight is received by the chief warlock, or not at all. Anything less and you could rightly say it was buried by a functionary, and I will not be the functionary in that sentence. You have asked to be routed accordingly. I am routing you accordingly. You will keep your iron. You will keep your feet. And you will come with me, now, up into the ministry, and I will convene the only 3 people in this building entitled to be handed the law of a foreign nation, and you will set it down in front of all 3 at once, in the light, with witnesses, exactly as your keeper oaths no doubt instructed you, because I have dealt with your nation for 40 years, and I know that when a goblin says in the light, with witnesses, he means it as a threat, and a perturbate, it. Bring the iron, herald. And a piece of advice freely given, which your kind does not usually accept and should, when you stand in front of the chief warlock, do not tell him about the debt of the blood first. Tell him about the child. He is a great man and a subtle one, and he will have 40 answers ready for a point of treaty law. He will have none ready for the child, because the child is the one thing in this whole matter he was certain no one else knew about. And a man is never so honest as in the first moment he learns that his secret has a witness." Grivnak looked at her and revised, upward, everything the bank's file had said about Perpetua Wick, and picked up the iron. "Madam," he said, "you would have made a formidable goblin." "I have been told," said Perpetua Wick, already walking, "that it is the worst thing anyone has ever said to me, and I have chosen to keep it this way." Ayake, and that is the worst thing anyone has ever said to me, and I have chosen to keep it this way. Ayake. They convened in a small high room off the Wizengamot floor because Perpetua Wick had judged correctly that the great chamber itself would turn a summons into a spectacle before it could be understood, and she wanted it understood first and spectacular later. She fetched 3 wizards, and only 3, and she fetched them herself, and Grivnak stood in the middle of the small high room with a warm iron in his hands, and watched the wizarding world's answer to a goblin summons walk in one at a time. The Minister for Magic came first, flustered and self-important, a man who governed by being agreeable to whoever had spoken to him last, and Grivnak dismissed him inside a breath as the least of the three and the most likely to do harm by accident. The Director of Magical Law Enforcement came second, and her Grivnak did not dismiss, a broad, plain, unhurried witch with a monocle and a scarred jaw, who looked at the goblin in the iron and said nothing at all, only took up a position by the wall where she could see the whole room, which was the position Grivnak himself would have taken, and he understood he was looking at the one wizard in the room who would do her job, no matter whom it embarrassed, and marked her as the reason this might, against all odds, be done correctly. And then the third came in, and the room changed. Because he was old and tall and unhurried, and he wore his power the way Ragnarok wore his, without noticing it, and his eyes went at once to the iron in Grivnak's hands, and read it, or read the shape of it, in the half-second before he arranged his face into mild and grandfatherly attention, and Grivnak, who had watched Marogrind read a seal without touching it, knew a reader when he saw one, and knew that Albus Dumbledore had understood he was in serious trouble before he had crossed the threshold, and had decided, in the same half-second, to appear not to be. "I understand," Dumbledore said gently, settling into the room's calculation like a man taking a familiar chair, "that our friends beneath the bank have brought us a matter of some antiquity. I have always found that the oldest matters are the ones best discussed slowly and with tea. Perpetua, might we—" "No tea," Grivnak said. He did not say it loudly. He said it the way you set down a weight, and it stopped the old wizard's gentle opening the way a hand stops a swinging door, and every wizard in the room looked at the goblin, and Grivnak took the counsel Perpetua Wick had given him in the corridor, because it had been good counsel Perpetua Wick had given him in the corridor, because it had been good counsel, and he did not begin with the debt of the blood. "Chief Warlock," Grivnak said, 6 years ago you placed a child of the House of Potter. You placed him in secret with Muggle relatives, under a blood word of your own making, and you filed the guardianship yourself, and you told no one where, because you believed that no one else could find him, and no one else was keeping the account. He let the warm iron turn a little in his hands, so the light ran along the graven runes, and he watched the old wizard's mild face and saw, exactly as Perpetua Wick had promised, the mildness cost him to hold. I have seen the child, Chief Warlock, yesterday morning. I stood in the kitchen you chose for him. I looked at his wrists. I saw the door that bolts from the outside. And I have come to tell you, in the light, with witnesses, on the true iron of my nation, that you were wrong about the account. Someone else has been keeping it. Someone has been keeping it for 91 years, and the account has come due." The room was very quiet. "The child," said Dumbledore, and his voice had changed, only a little, only enough for a reader to catch, "is safe. The protection I placed upon that house is among the oldest and strongest known to." "The protection you placed upon that house," Grivnak said, "keeps out a certain kind of enemy and does nothing whatever about the enemy at the table. I read the rating mine way up the path. It is competent, it is loveless only friank clothed in another child's leavings and has learned to make himself smaller at the sound of a man's voice, and you did not know that, Chief Warlock, because you set your ward and did not go back, and that precisely that is the iron plate down of the room. Down of the Striern, bald of Trield and betrained of Altheth Sturld, hear the summons of the undermoot of the nation of the deep. A debt of the blood, sworn at the third gate in the stewardship of Nagnuk son of Nagnuk, has come to its reckoning. By its terms, the last of the sworn blood, being a child in want of guard, is from this hour the ward of the entire goblin nation, taken under the protection of the deep, to be kept until he be no longer a child. The wizarding world will surrender the keeping of the child to the deep, or the deep will come, in the light, before all your courts and keep him. Either way the child will be kept. This is not a request, and it is not a negotiation, and it cannot be unread because it is written here, in our law, and set down before your highest authority by a herald on his own 2 feet in the daylight. It is done. It is yours now." Grivnak inclined his head, the courtesy a goblin pays an equal, to Dumbledore, and to the scarred witch by the wall, and after a moment's honest reckoning, to Perpetua Wick, and not to the minister. "You will want to convene your court. Convene it. The deep is content to stand before all of it. We have been ready for 91 years. He let the silence hold 1 beat longer than was comfortable, which was a goblin's way of signing a document. "You have had 1 day. It was the scarred witch by the wall who broke the silence, and she broke it not with outrage, but with a question. And the question told Grivnak everything he needed to know about which wizard in the room would decide the matter. "You said the last of the sworn blood," she said. She had not moved from the wall, and she did not consult a paper. She had held the words as he spoke them, the way an officer holds a suspect's account, listening for the scene. Sworn blood implies an instrument of swearing. An instrument implies parties, a date, a place, witnesses, and a consideration given. I will not take a foreign nation's word that its own oath binds a British child. No court would, and you would not respect a court that did. So, before this goes 1 step further, tell me the instrument. When was it sworn, and where, and by whom, and what precisely was given, that a whole nation should swear so large a thing in return? If you cannot answer, herald. This is a claim and not an oath, and I will treat it as one. If you can answer, and answer specifically, I will know I am dealing with a fact and not a demand, and facts I can work with, however unwelcome." Her scarred jaw set. "I am Amelia Bones, Director of Magical Law Enforcement. I am not your enemy this morning, whatever these others may be. But I am not your friend either yet. I am the law, and the law asks for the instrument. Produce it." Grivnak looked at her, and there was a thing in him that a wizard would have called satisfaction, and that a goblin called only the correct question, correctly asked. And he answered her the way she had asked, specifically, coldly, without a rounded stroke. "It was sworn in the summer of the year, your calendar number's 1896, he said. "In the 43rd year of the stewardship of Nagnok son of Nagnok, at the third gate of the deep 3 miles beneath the ground on which this ministry stands. It was witnessed by the Undermoot of the Goblin Nation, sealed with the Undermoot's own seal, which the bank holds and which I will produce to your court under guard. And it is graven upon the iron before you in 2 hands, the wizards, which your own experts may authenticate against the House of Potter's ledgers, held unbroken by Gringotts for 400 years. And the goblins in the deep script, which no wizard has ever been taught to cut it. What was given, Director Bones, was a life, very nearly. A warder of the House of Potter, in the flooding of the low deep, held a gate open with his own strength so that 30 of my nation could climb out of the drowning dark, and spent himself so far in the holding that we did not think he would live, and asked, when he could speak, not for gold, which we offered and he refused, but for this, that if ever a child of his blood were left in want of guard, the nation would keep that child. That is the instrument, that is the date, the place, the witnesses, the consideration. It is as specific as any contract in your ministry's vaults, and older than most, and I will submit every particular of it to whatever experts this court names, on one condition, that the authentication be quick, while your experts compare scripts. A 5-year-old is sleeping under a stair behind a bolt, and the oath does not care about your procedural comforts, and neither, Director, do I." Amelia Bones looked at him for a long moment. "That," she said at last, "is an instrument." She turned to the room, to the minister and the chief warlock both. "I will convene authentication. I will convene the Wizengamot. And I will say now, so no one may later claim to have misheard, that a claim answered this specifically, on iron that cannot be forged and a ledger unbroken for 400 years, is not a thing this ministry may wave away as goblin cheek. It is a fact, and we will treat it as one, properly and in the light, because I have the distinct impression that doing so is the only way any of us come out of this with our dignity, and I intend to keep mine." She did not look at Dumbledore when she added, "Whatever great man in this room the truth costs, it will be told." Everyone knew whom she meant. For a long moment no one else in the small high room spoke. Pari, Depain-Sitz, Answerable, and Grivnak watched the greatest wizard in Britain look down at the law of the deep and understand, at last and completely, that the child he had been so certain was his alone to place and forget had been, all along, the sworn ward of a nation, older than the ministry, reaching for him through the earth with one thin thread for 91 years, and that the account the whole cold crowd so caltiable as smapahal the dig cow. Chapter 3, The Reckoning. Harry Potter woke in the cupboard under the stairs on the 3rd morning after the goblin came, and lay in the dark listening, because the house had a sound it did not usually have. The house was never quiet in the morning. There was Aunt Petunia in the kitchen, and the kettle, and Dudley on the stairs. The stairs were over Harry's head, and Dudley coming down them was a thing you heard with your whole body, and Uncle Vernon's voice going on about the news. But this morning the stairs were still, and the kettle had not gone on, and Aunt Petunia was standing in the hall. Harry could tell by where the floor creaked, standing very still in the hall, and not doing anything, which she never did. And after a while, Harry heard why. There was something in the street, not a car. Harry knew all the cars. This was a low sound, a hum. The kind of sound you felt in the floor of the cupboard more than heard, and under it, faint, a ringing, like when Aunt Petunia tapped the good glasses to see if they were real. Except it did not stop. It went on and on, very quiet, coming up through the ground, and Harry put his hand flat on the floor of the cupboard the way he did when he wanted to know if a thing was real and the floor was humming. He knew, without being able to say how he knew, that it had come for him. He was 5 years old and he did not have words for most of what he understood, but he had a great many understandings that had no words, because that was the kind of knowing you built in a house where the words all belonged to other people. He understood, lying in the dark with his hand on the humming floor, that the goblin had said, "I will still be here," and that grown people who came to this house did not say that, and that the goblin had said, "We keep our accounts, all of them, however old," in a voice that had made Aunt Petunia sign the paper fast to make him go, and that now there was a humming in the ground, and Aunt Petunia was standing in the hall not doing anything. He put these understandings next to each other, the way he sorted the buttons in the tin he was allowed, and they made a shape. And the shape was, the goblin has come back, and he has brought the under the ground with him. Harry was not frightened. He examined this, lying in the dark, because it was usually at least a little frightened in the mornings. That was simply the weather of the mornings, and this morning he was not, and he wanted to know why, and it was because of the wrists. The goblin had looked at his wrists. Nobody looked at his wrists. People in this house looked at his hands to see if they were clean, and looked at his face to see if he was about to be a nuisance, but the goblin had looked at his wrists the way you look at a thing you are worried about, and a person who looks at your wrists the way you look at a thing you are worried about, and a person who looks at your wrists like that, Harry understood, is a person who has already decided you matter, before you have done anything to earn it, which had never once happened to Harry in his life, and which he had, you are not afraid of the thing that looked at your wrists. You wait for it. You have been waiting for it, it turns out, without knowing its name, for a very long time. The doorbell rang. In the hall, Aunt Petunia made a small sound and did not move to answer it. And up above, at last, Harry heard Uncle Vernon's tread come out of the big bedroom and stop at the top of the stairs, and Uncle Vernon's voice come down, low and gone strange at the edges. Petunia, there are. How many are there? How many of them are in the street? I don't know, said Aunt Petunia in a whisper. To the front door she would not open. I stopped counting. Harry sat up in the cupboard, in the toe-big pajamas, and put his taped spectacles on, and folded his hams in his lap the way you do when you are being good, and waited to be sent for, because that was the only way he had ever gone anywhere. And outside in the humming street the nation of the deep stood in the morning light of Privet Drive, and waited to be let in to keep what it had sworn. Aye. Grivnak stood at the gate of number 4 and did not knock again. He had rung the bell once, which was a courtesy. And the courtesy was spent, and now he stood at the gate in the pale suburban morning with the nation at his back and let the house feel what was in the street. He had not brought many. That had been argued, down in the deep. Dulgruth had wanted a full warden score, wanted the deep to come up out of the earth in its plate with its blades bare and let the wizards see exactly what they had provoked. But Marrowgrind had ruled against it, and Grivnak had agreed with the ruling because a score of armed goblins in a muggle street was a photograph, and the photograph would be the story, and the story would not be the oath. So he had brought 12. 12 was not an army, 12 was a jury. 11 wardens in the black folded plate of the deep, standing not in a line but in the loose, easy spacing of creatures who did not need a line, and at their center Dulgruth himself, keeper of the gates, come up into the light for the first time in 91 years to keep the gate he had held in the dark, and at the front, alone at the gate, in a clerk's plain black, carrying nothing but a handspan of warm iron, Grivnak. And behind the 12, they convened Shirk Court had had done the thing cum court stew, when it schwide might, which was bold time, which by the fright schwide marked we bergen act, not be published my tweet kaket or hark med my kemapnek, but expert by bakbar kaket marketa patriarchet. It was, Grivnak thought, exactly the right number of witnesses. Enough that nothing done here could be denied. Not so many that it became a battle. Marrowgrind had chosen the number the way she chose everything, correctly. The front door of number 4 opened. It opened because Vernon Dursley had decided Grivnak could see that a man's home was his castle, and that no amount of goblins in the street was going to make him cower behind his own door. A decision Grivnak respected in the abstract, and found, in the particular, to be the single stupidest thing a large frightened wizard-adjacent man could have done. Vernon Dursley filled his own doorway in his dressing gown, purpling, and looked out at 12 armored goblins and a chief warlock and a director of magical law enforcement standing in his begonias, and did the thing that men like Vernon Dursley do when the world has grown too large for them, which was to make it about the lawn. You are on my property, Vernon Dursley said in a voice pitched to carry to the neighbors and betray him to them, and you will remove yourselves from my property, the whole pack of you, whatever you are, before I telephone thee, Vernon. Petunia, behind him, one hand on his arm. She had seen Dumbledore. She, at least, understood the sizes of things. Vernon, be quiet. I will not be quiet in my own, Mr. Dursley. Grivnak did not raise his voice. He had learned 40 years in the audit rooms that the way to be heard over a loud, frightened man is not to be louder, but to be colder, to drop your voice below his so that people lean toward you to hear it and away from him, and he did that now, and it worked as it always worked. I will speak and you will listen, because what I am about to say is the only thing standing between this morning and a very much worse morning, and I would not have you miss it while you are shouting about your lawn. He let that sit. 3 days ago, I stood in your front room and required a signature on a dormant trust. That was true, and it was also a pretext, and you were not clever enough to wonder why a bank would send a herald to obtain a signature. A letter could have carried. I came to look at the child. I have looked, and I have come back with my nation to take him. The word take went through the assembly like the cold ring of the iron, and Grivnak felt behind him Dumbledore draw breath to speak, and did not turn, and did not let him. Not, Grivnak said, the way you are all now imagining. Not by force, though force is standing in your begonias and could have this house down to its footings before your ministry finished writing the incident report. By right. by a right older than your ministry, sworn before your grandfathers were born, which every wizard here is about to be made to understand whether he wishes to or not." He turned, at last, and looked at Dumbledore, and past Dumbledore and Amelia Bones, and he raised his voice now, because now he wanted the neighbors and the witnesses and the whole bright morning to hear it. "This is a reckoning. It is not a raid, and it is not a rescue. And if any wizard here treats it as either, he will spoil a thing that has been done correctly for 91 years. Our reckoning has an order. We will observe the order. Director Bones, you are the law in the street, as I am the law under it. Will you keep your wizards to the order, if I keep mine?" It was a shrewd move, and Grivnak knew it. He had gone over the heads of the minister and the chief warlock and put the question to the one wizard whose whole office was procedure, whose pride was in doing the thing correctly, and he had offered her the thing an officer of the law cannot refuse without becoming a mob, an order to keep. Amelia Bones looked at him for a moment through the monocle. Then she looked at Dumbledore, not for permission, but to see whether he would try to seize the moment. And Grivnak watched her mark that Dumbledore was too wise to try, and she looked back at Grivnak. "I will keep my wizards to the order," Amelia Bones said, "if the order is lawful. I do not yet know that it is. You have said this child is your ward by an oath. I have read the summons your herald set before us. I have read it 4 times, and I will tell you plainly, Goblin, that a summons is not a proof, and the Wizengamot has not yet ruled. And if you take a British child out of a British home this morning on the strength of a plate of metal I cannot read, I will have no choice but to call it an abduction, whatever it is called under the ground." She did not soften it. Grivnak respected that entirely. "So, if this is a reckoning with an order, then show me the order. Prove the oath. Here, now, before you lay one finger on the child. Do that, and I will keep every wand in this street in its holster with my own authority. Fail to do it, and I will keep them ready. That is my order, Herald. Match it." And Grivnak, who had been sent up into the light by the Keeper of Oaths precisely because he did not round his strokes and did not haggle a debt of the blood, felt something that was almost pleasure, the clean, hard pleasure of a sum about to come out even because the Director of Magical Law Enforcement had just, without knowing it, asked the Deep to do the one thing the Deep most wanted to do in front of witnesses, which was to prove itself. "Director Bones," Grivnak said, and inclined his head, "the courtesy to an equal, you would have made a formidable goblin. That is the second time in 3 days I have said it to a witch of your ministry, and I begin to think we have been underestimating you." He turned and lifted his voice and called into the still house past the purpling man in the doorway in a tone entirely changed, gentle, the tone he had found he had 3 days ago and not known he owned. "Harry Potter, will you come out to the step? No one will make you. I only want you where you can see, because what is about to happen is about you, and a person ought to see the things that are about him. Come to the step, if you like. I will still be here." There was a silence in the house. And then, past Vernon Dursley's dressing gown bulk, small and swallowed and gray, in his taped spectacles, with his hands folded in front of him the way a child folds them when he has been taught that folded hands are safe, Harry Potter came to the step of number 4 and looked out at 12 armored goblins and a chief warlock and the whole bright reckoning morning, and found the one face he was looking for, and said in a clear, light, unbothered voice that carried down the whole silent street, "You said you'd still be here." "I said I would," Grivnak said, "and I am. Goblins keep their accounts." "Ah, yes. The reckoning had an order, and Grivnak observed it, because the order was the whole point. He did not begin with the child, though every instinct in him, and he could feel, every warden at his back, wanted to sweep the small gray figure off that step, and behind the black plate of the Deep, and let the wizards argue with a wall. He began, instead, where the law began. He turned to face the wizards, and he held up the warm iron, and he said, "The oath is a debt of the blood, answered by a debt of the blood. Before I prove that the debt is due, I will prove that the debt exists, because Director Bones is right, that a summons is not a proof, and the Deep does not ask to be believed. It asks to be checked." He looked at Dumbledore. "Chief Warlock, you are the finest reader of old magic in this island. I do you no flattery, it is simply true, and it is why I am glad you are here and not some lesser wizard who would have to take my word. There is a ward on this house. You said it. There is another thing on this house, older, that you did not set, and that I will wager the whole of my nation's gold you have never once noticed, because it was not made to be noticed. Read the threshold, Chief Warlock, not your ward. Under your ward. Tell these witnesses what you find, in your own words, so that no one can say the goblin planted it." Grivnak watched the old wizard hesitate, and understood the hesitation, because to accept the challenge was to admit there might be something on the house he had missed, in front of the Director of Magical Law Enforcement and the Record and the Minister, and a lesser man would have refused it to protect his standing. Dumbledore did not refuse it. Grivnak revised him upward too. Whatever else the man was, and Grivnak had a cold ledger of doubts about a wizard who set a ward on a child and did not go back for 6 years. He was a reader, and a reader cannot resist a true thing offered to be read. Dumbledore came forward past the goblins, who parted for him without being told, because Grivnak had willed it, and the wardens read Grivnak, the way Grivnak read parchment. And the old wizard actually knelt, in the begonias at the threshold of number 4, and laid his long spotted hand flat on the doorstep, and closed his eyes. For a long moment nothing happened, and the street held its breath, all of it. Wizard and Goblin and the peering neighbors behind their curtains and Harry Potter on the step looked down at the old man kneeling at his feet with an expression of frank astonishment, because no old man had ever knelt at Harry's feet before, and Harry did not know it was the threshold being read and not himself, and Grivnak saw the child think, for one unguarded moment, that the great grave stranger had knelt down for him. And Grivnak filed nothing away, because his grandmother had meant. Dumbledore opened his eyes. "There's a thread," he said, and his voice had lost its practiced gentleness and gone quiet with a thing Grivnak recognized as the honesty of a reader confronted with a true thing he did not make. "A binding. It runs out of the earth, under the step, and up over the threshold, and it is old. Older than my ward by a very long way. It is not wizard's work. It is goblin wrought, and it is worn nearly to nothing, and it has one purpose, which is..." He stopped and looked up, and for the first time all morning the great wizard looked, simply, old, which is to know where the child is. It is a finding thread. It has been finding this child, and the mother before him, and the grandfather before her, for I cannot read the years, but it is generations. It has been reaching for this bloodline, through the ground, all this time, and I never saw it, because I was not looking under my own ward. He rose, slowly, brushing the earth from his robes, and he faced the witnesses, and to his great and permanent credit, Grivnak would grant him this forever after he told them the truth. The goblin has not planted anything. What he says is on this house, is on this house, is on this house. It is old goblin binding magic, and it has been keeping account of this child's blood since long before I placed him here. I did not know it existed. I would have said it was impossible. A pause. I was wrong. Amelia Bones wrote something in no notebook. She simply looked, and Grivnak saw the DMLE director register the single most important sentence spoken in that street, which was "I was wrong" from the mouth of Albus Dumbledore, and understood that the reckoning had, in that sentence, been half won. "The thread proves the oath exists," Grivnak said. "It does not prove the oath is due. That is the second proving, and it is the hard one, and Director Bones was right to ask for it. Because an oath that exists is not an oath that binds until its terms are met. Its terms are these: that the child be under the age of first magic, that he be in want of guard, unfed, unwarded, given to hands that do not hold. The first term you may all judge with your own eyes. He is 5 years old and has done no magic, and the household would have reported him to you in an instant if he had, for they fear it above all things. It is the second term that must be proven, and I will not prove it with my words, because my words are a party to it, and a party does not judge his own cause." He turned. "The oath itself will prove it. It was made to. Watch the thread." He knelt then, Grivnak, at the same threshold where Dumbledore had knelt, but he did not lay his hand on the step. He laid the warm iron plate on the step, the nation's true law, graven with the oath, and he spoke to the old worn finding thread in the deep script's tongue, and he said the reckoning word, the word that no clerk was permitted to say, and that had been given to him alone, for this alone, by the keeper of oaths. He told the thread that the debt had come due, and asked it, in the old form, whether the child it had found so long ago was held. And the thread answered. It answered the way the seal had answered Marrowgrind, the way the floor of the cupboard had hummed under a small boy's hand, except that now it answered in front of witnesses, in the light, so that no wizard could ever say the deep had done it in the dark. The worn goblin thread, 91 years thin, drank the warmth off the iron plate and woke. And it ran up over the threshold of number 4, visible now, a line of low coal-colored light, and it went to the child on the step, and stopped. It circled Harry Potter once, at the height of his folded hands, a ring of quiet fire. And it did not bind him, and it did not harm him. It tested him. And Grivnak, watching, saw the thread do the thing the oath had been written to do, the thing the whole reckoning turned on. It looked for a guard on the child. It looked for the thing a well-kept child has around him, the warm, invisible weight of someone holding, the ward that is not made of magic, but of being wanted. And it found none. It went all the way around the small gray figure and found nothing holding. And where it should have met another guard and deferred to it as goblin binding always defers to a true prior claim, it met open air, and in the meeting the thread flared, once, bright, an accusation written in coal light in the middle of Privet Drive for every witness to read, unwarded, unheld, want of guard, the debt is due. Harry Potter stood inside the ring of quiet fire and was not burned and was not afraid, and looked down at it circling his folded hands, and looked up at Grivnak, and asked the blunt, terrible question of the small, the one no adult in that street would have dared ask aloud. Is it saying nobody was keeping me? The street was silent. Yes, Grivnak said. He would not lie to the child. He had decided that 3 days ago in a clean front room, and he did not revisit decisions once the sum was checked. It is saying nobody was keeping you. It is a very old kind of magic, Harry, and it does not know how to say a kind thing or an unkind thing. It only says the true thing. And the true thing is that you have been in his house for 6 years and no one in it was keeping you, and the magic can tell, the way I could tell from your wrists." He rose from the threshold and he took up the warm iron, and the coal-colored rings settled and dimmed but did not go out, because the reckoning was not finished, and he faced the whole assembly, wizard and goblin, and he said the thing the order required him to say. "The oath exists. The chief warlock has read it. The oath is due. You have all seen it read, the child, and find him unheld. By the terms sworn at the third gate 91 years ago, Harry Potter is, from this hour, the ward of the entire nation of the deep. Director Bones, you said you would keep your wizards to the order if I prove the oath. I have proven it in the light, before witnesses checkable, by the wizarding world's own finest reader and by the oath's own magic. Is it proven?" Amelia Bones did not answer at once. She was, Grivnak saw, a scrupulous creature, and she was turning it over the way he would have turned it over, looking for the flaw and finding, because there was none. When she spoke slowly, and to the whole street, in the voice of the law. "It is proven," she said, "that there exists on this house an ancient goblin binding, generations old, which the chief warlock himself has confirmed and which I saw with my own eyes read the child and find him unguarded." Her scarred jaw worked, "and it is proven to my own great shame as an officer of a ministry that placed this child and did not look at him, that the binding tells the truth. I do not fully understand goblin oath law. I will not pretend to. But I understand evidence, and I understand a child's wrists, and I have both in front of me in this street, and I will not stand between this nation and its ward on the strength of not understanding a thing that has proven itself 3 times over." She turned, then, and looked at Albus Dumbledore, and there was iron in it. "Chief Warlock, you placed him here. You will want to contest this before the Wiesengamat, and it is your right, and I will convene the court for you gladly. But you will contest it in a courtroom, with words, before judges. Not in this street? This morning, over the head of a 5-year-old who has just been told by an honest goblin that no one was keeping him. Do you understand me? Not here. Not today. Today the law of this street says the oath is proven, and I will keep my wizards to it." She looked at Grivnak. "Take your ward, Harold, correctly, gently, in the light, as you have done everything else. And know that the Wiesengamat will hear it, and soon, and that this is not the end of it." "It is not the end of it," Grivnak agreed. "It is the reckoning. The court is the standing. We are content to stand." He inclined his head to her fully, the deepest courtesy a goblin owned, the one he had not given even Dumbledore. "Director Bones, whatever your ministry did in placing this child, you have done correctly this morning, and the deep does not forget a thing done correctly any more than it forgets a debt. Remember that you have made a friend under the ground today. It is worth more than you know." And then Grivnak turned to the step, and to the small gray figure standing inside the last dim ring of coal light, and the whole hard cold legal machinery of the reckoning fell away from his voice, and he crouched down so that his eyes were level with the child's eyes behind the taped spectacles, and he spoke to Harry Potter, and to no one else in the street, as if the street were empty. "Aha! Harry," Grivnak said, "I am going to tell you a true thing, and then I am going to ask you a true question, and you may answer it any way you like, and no one—" He glanced, once, at the purpling man in the doorway, and back. "No one will touch you for the answer. That is finished. Whatever else happens, that is finished, today, in front of all these people, and it does not come back. Do you understand me?" Harry looked at him. Behind the round spectacles, the green eyes were doing the thing they did, watching the room, except that the room was a whole street and the goblin was in the middle of it and had crouched down to be the same size as Harry, which no grown person did, ever. And Harry did not have a word for what that was, but he had the understanding of it, the wordless kind, the button-sorting kind. And the understanding was, he made of smalt, but your butt, but the butt hate, gummered of finioli. "Here is the true thing," Grivnak said. "A long time ago, before your mother was born, before her father was born, a man of your family did something very brave and very foolish for my people. He held a door open in the dark, in the water, so that 30 of us could get out, and it nearly killed him. And when we asked him what he wanted for it, he did not want gold. He wanted a promise. He said, 'If there is ever a child of my blood who has no one keeping him, will you keep him?' And my whole nation, every goblin who was alive then, and their children and their children's children, all of us, down to me, we said yes. We swore it, and a goblin does not break what he swears. Not for 91 years, not for 1,000. He paused. "You are the child, Harry. You are the child of his blood, and no one was keeping you, and so the promise came due, and my whole nation has come up out of the ground to keep it. Not because you did anything, because it was sworn. Do you understand?" Harry was quiet for a moment, sorting it. Then he said, with the terrible directness of 5, "Your whole, everybody? Everybody promised to keep me. Everybody," Grivnak said. "The wardens, the smiths, the lore masters, the old ones and the little ones. There are goblin children, Harry, no bigger than you, who will grow up knowing your name, because you are the ward of the whole deep, and the whole deep keeps its accounts." He watched the child try to hold the size of that and fail the way a small hand fails to hold a great deal of water, and he did not make it smaller because it was not too big. It was not to make it smaller because it was not too big. It was howden a child had, and it tailed it well to end debate. And here is the true question. You do not have to come. The oath binds us, Harry, not you. We are sworn to keep you, but we will not carry off a child who does not wish to be carried, because that would make us thieves. And my people are many things, but we are not thieves. So I am asking, down under the ground where my nation lives, there is a place made ready for you. There is warm light that comes up out of the stone. There is food, real food, and enough of it, and it is yours, provided for you, not left over from anyone. There are people who have sworn to keep you, and who will look at your wrists every day to be sure you are growing the whole way. It is very far down, and it is dark between the lights, and it is not like anything you have seen, and it is strange, and some of it may frighten you at first. He held out his hand, the long-fingered goblin hand that had frightened Aunt Petunia at the door. Will you come and be kept, Harry Potter? Will you come down to the deep, the back? Idvite for any morning where one had ever kept him, looked at the goblin's outstretched hand, and looked back one time, at the open door of number 4, at his aunt with her hand over her mouth and his uncle purpling and silent in the wall of photographs behind them, all of Dudley, none of him. And he looked at it the way you look at a thing to be sure you are remembering it correctly. And then he looked back at, he did not take the hand. He looked at it, and then he looked up at the goblin's face, and he asked, in the clear light, unbothered voice, one last blunt, terrible question. The only one that had ever really mattered. The one no one in that house had ever let him ask. Will you still be there tomorrow? Grivnick of the House of Ledgers, who did not, as a rule, want things, crouched in the begonias of number 4, Privet Drive, in front of the Chief Warlock and the Director of Magical Law Enforcement and the whole bright reckoning morning, and answered the ward of the entire nation of the deep. Tomorrow, Grivnack said, and every tomorrow after it until you are not a child anymore, and then every tomorrow after that, because that is not in the oath, Harry. The oath ends when you are grown, but I am telling you now, in front of all these witnesses, so that it is on the record and cannot be unsaid, I will still be there, not because it is sworn. Because I looked at your wrists, and I found that I wished to. He kept his hand out, steady, unhurried, in the light. Come and be kept. And Harry Potter took the goblin's hand and stepped down off the step of number 4, and did not look back at the house again. And the 12 of the deep closed around the small gray figure and the herald, not roughly, the way a hand closes around a thing it means never to drop. And Dolgruth, keeper of the gates who had held a gate in the dark 91 years ago so that 30 could come through, looked down at the child his gate had been held for, all that time, without any of them knowing. And the ruined old gate voice said one, or it would warn it, arroweth the way to wit. Then the nation of the deep turned, with its ward in the middle of it, and walked back down Privet Drive the way it had come. Okay. The way down was not the way the wizards went. Harry knew about the way the wizards went, a little, because he had once heard Aunt Petunia hiss the word Gringotts at Uncle Vernon over the goblin's letter, and the voice she used for things that were his fault by existing. He had imagined a bank with a door and steps. There was no door and no steps. The goblins walked him to the end of a nothing sort of alley behind the shops where the bins were, and Dolgruth put his scarred hand flat against a brick wall that was only a brick wall, and said something to it in the clacking undertongue. And the wall remembered that it was also a gate, and opened, not like a door, but like a thing waking up, and beyond it went down. Harry stopped at the top of the down. He could not help it. It was very dark past the first few feet, and the dark went a long way, and he was 5. And there are things a 5-year-old's legs will not do, no matter how brave the rest of him is. And one of them is walk into a dark that has no bottom you can see. Grivnack felt the small hand tighten in his and stopped when Harry stopped. He did not pull. He did not say come along or don't be silly, which were the 2 things grown people said, and Harry braced for one of them out of long habit, and neither came. It is dark, Grivnack agreed as if Harry had said something sensible and correct, which no grown person had ever agreed he had. It is dark at the top. That is the worst part, and you're standing in it, so from here it only gets better. Watch. He lifted his free hand and did nothing that Harry could see, but the dark below them was not empty after all, and it answered. A low orange light came up in the stone of the passage, faint and warm like the inside of the coal fire when Aunt Petunia let it go down, and it did not flicker the way the fire flickered. It was steady, and it spread down and down as far as Harry could see, waking a little pool of warm light for every few feet of the way, so that the passage that had been a black nothing became a long soft golden throat going gently down into the ground. It is not empty, Grivnack said. It only looks empty from the top, because the light is polite and waits to be walked toward. Nothing down here will make you walk into the dark, Harry. The dark comes to meet you, and it brings a light. Shall we see? Harry looked at the warm gold throat of the passage, and at the goblin who had agreed the dark was bad instead of telling him it wasn't. And he took one step down, and the light came up around his feet like warm water, and it did not hurt. And he took another, and by the 3rd step he had forgotten to be afraid. because a thing that lights up to meet you is not a thing to be afraid of. And Harry had always understood that. He had simply never met one before. They went down a long time. Harry stopped being able to tell how long because there was no window and no clock, but he did not mind because it was warm, actually warm, warmer the lower they went, which was backwards from cupboards and cellars and everything Harry knew about going down, and he said so, blunt, "It's getting warmer." And a warden behind him made a low clacking sound that Harry worked out, after a startled moment, was laughing. "He has noticed in 100 steps," the warden said in thick trade tongue to Grivnick. "What took the last wizard I brought down 100 years to believe? The deep is a forge, ward, not a cellar. It has been warm since before there was a cold to be warm against. Wizards never believe it until their fingers stop aching. You believed it in 100 steps." The warden considered Harry with what Harry slowly understood was respect. "Good. Tired hunter did. You Kirchen quaint a man. Why for him? In theen a thinkily. Why re one. At the mall grey figure in the middle of the 12, and then did a thing Harry had never had done to him. They stood aside, and bent their heads not to Dulgruth, not to Grivnack, but to Harry a word bow to almost nothing, and Harry did not know what to do with it, and settled flicker packing, laughter, wavdre, a short sharp bow of creatures who bowed to almost nothing, and Harry did not know, ban kamabdi dim DSL, then deeper, warmer, the light richer, the stone gone from cut block to a smooth, worn living rock that felt lovely under Harry's two big shoes. Second gate. Past the second gate the passage opened, once, onto a gallery that looked down over a working floor, and Harry stopped dead. Because down below in the coal light, goblins were making things, not counting gold, making things. And Harry had never in his life seen anyone make anything except Aunt Petunia make his uncle's dinner, which she did with her mouth pressed thin. These goblins made with their whole bodies and their whole faces. A smith drew a rod of iron white out of a forge and laid it on a stone and struck it, and the strike rang up to the gallery and came back off the far dark a half-second late, so that every blow had a ghost, and where the hammer fell the white iron bent and remembered a new shape, and the smith turned it and struck again, and the thing that had been a plain rod became blow by blow a leaf, a real leaf veined, thin as a true leaf, out of solid iron, and the smith held it up to the light and turned it and was not satisfied and put it back in the fire to do bear. "Why is he making a leaf?" Harry asked. It was the bluntest possible question, and it went straight to the bottom of a thing Grivnack had been trying to explain to wizards for 40 years. "Because it is hard," Grivnack said, "and because it is beautiful, and because a smith who can make an iron leaf that a bird would land on can make anything, and we would rather he practiced on a leaf than on a gate that has to hold. But mostly, Harry, because he wants to. A wizard makes a thing to use it and throws it away when it breaks. A goblin makes a thing to be true, true to itself, true all the way through. So that in 1,000 years someone finds it in the deep and knows a goblin made it, because only a goblin would have troubled to make the underside of a leaf as fine as the top, where no one was ever going to look." He watched the boy watch the smith. "Nothing down here is made to be thrown away. Not a leaf, not a gate, not a ward." He did not say not a boy because it did not need saying, and because a thing said that did not need saying was a wizard's habit, and Grivnack did not have it. Harry watched the smith pull the iron leaf out of the fire and strike it once clear him. And think for a fortune moment, and a glance at Dulgruth for the permission of it, held the finished leaf up toward the gallery, toward Harry, an offering, and Harry did not understand at first that it was for him, and then he did, and something happened in his chest that he had no word for, and he took the warm iron leaf in both hands, and it was the first thing anyone had ever made for him, and he held it all the rest of the way, Dantonine, for Samper for the Bulmernated, the custom communication, and then they came to the third gate, and everyone stopped, and Harry felt the stopping run through the 12 like a held breath and did not understand it, and looked up at Grivnack to be told. Grivnack crouched down again, level with him, in the warm coal light before the third gate. "This one," Grivnack said quietly, "is the one. You remember the man of your family who held the door in the dark, in the water, so 30 of my people could get out. This is the door. This is the third gate. It was flooded 91 years ago, and he stood just here, just where you are standing, Harry, and held it open with his own strength, alone, until the water took his working and nearly took him. Dulgruth, there, carried him up out of it, from just past this gate. And it was here, when he could speak again, that he asked for the promise, and it was here that the promise was sworn." He looked at the child standing in the exact place where a man of his blood had once spent nearly his whole life for a nation of strangers, and where, 91 years later, that nation had brought the blood back to keep the debt. "You are the first of his blood to stand at this gate since. We did not plan it so. The way down simply comes through here. There is no other road. But I find I am glad the road comes through here. I think he would be glad of it too." Harry looked at the third gate. It was old and black and enormous, and there were marks cut into the stone all around it that Harry could not read, and one of them, low down, at the height of a small boy's eyes, was newer than the rest, brighter, freshly struck, and Harry reached out without asking. He had learned not to touch things, but down here no one had smacked his hand once. and the not being smacked was still so new that his hand forgot to be afraid, and he put his fingers on the fresh cut mark. "What does this one say?" Harry asked. "The new one." Dolgruth, keeper of the gates, answered him, in the ruined old gate voice, and every goblin at the third gate went still to hear it, because it was not a small thing for the keeper of the gates to read a gate aloud. "It was struck 3 days ago," Dolgruth said, "when the nation swore the oath again, in its own voice, of its own will, and not because a wizard asked. It says," and he said it first in the old tongue, the deep script, the way it was cut and the sound of it filled the passage and came back off the dark a half-second late, and then he said it in the trade tongue for the ward, because the ward should know what his own hand was resting on, and of warm old light that had come up out of the stone to meet him, in the middle of a nation that had sworn, everyone hide, every stride, Yorimouth, Arv the Dekite de Valkabald the Bulds. Chapter 4. The Wards. There was too much food, and no one took it away. That was the thing Harry could not get used to in the first days, the thing that undid him more than the warm light or the dark between the lights or the goblins with their long teeth. It was a bowl. It was a plain iron bowl of something hot, a stew, thick dark with barley in it and roots Harry did not know and meat that fell apart when he touched it with the spoon. And it was set in front of him on the low stone table in the small warm room they had given him, and it was his, and when he had eaten it and looked up, braced, because looking up after eating was when the trouble came in the other house, no one told him he had enough. A goblin cook named Agnella, who was broad and impatient and had forearms like a smith's and a permanent grievance against the whole standing order of the universe, took the empty bowl away and looked at it, and looked at Harry, and filled it again, and set it back down, and said in trade tongue that came out like a series of small hammer blows, "You are hollow light. I have seen the finder's plate. It says hollow light. I do not permit hollow light at my tables. Eat the second bowl. There is a third if the second does not shame you into growing." Harry looked at the second bowl. "I'm allowed?" he said. Agnella stopped. Something happened in her broad, impatient face, and she turned it away from him, toward the pot, and did something unnecessary to the pot with a ladle, and when she spoke again her voice had gone rough in a way Harry did not understand, but recognized, because he had heard grown people's voices go like that once or twice, always when they thought no one was looking. "You are the ward of the whole deep," Agnella said to the pot. "There is not a thing in this nation you are not allowed, that a child should have. Eat your bowl, ward, and if anyone ever tells you again that you are not allowed to eat, you will send them to Agnella, and Agnella will explain it to them with the ladle." She banged the ladle once against the pot, for emphasis, and it rang like a small bell, and Harry, who had flinched at loud sounds his whole life, did not flinch at this one, because he was beginning to learn the difference between a loud sound that meant danger, and a loud sound that was only a goblin being emphatic, and the deep was full of the second kind, and Harry was learning to love it. He ate the second bowl. He did not manage the third. Agnella pretended to be disappointed and was, Harry could tell even at 5, secretly satisfied, and this too was a new thing to learn, that a grown person could be pretending to be cross while being pleased, and that you could tell, and that it was a kind of game, and that the game was warm. Grivna came to see him eat. Most days, in those first days, he did not make a thing of it. He would come into the small warm room on some clerk's errand with a plate of iron under his arm and a reckoning pen behind his ear, and he would sit on the low stone bench along the wall and do his work while Harry ate, and now and then he would look up and look at Harry's wrists, openly, the way he had looked at them in the front room, and make a small mark on his plate, and go back to work. Harry worked out after the 3rd or 4th day that the mark was about him, that the goblin was keeping an account of his wrists. "What are you writing?" Harry asked on the 4th day. Blunt, around a mouthful of bread, he was no longer eating fast, because he had learned there would be bread tomorrow. "I am keeping your account," Grivnick said, and turned the plate so Harry could see it, though Harry could not read the small hard runes. "Here is the day you came. Here is what your wrists were, and here," he touched a newer mark, "is today, and your wrists are a very little better, which I have written down because it is true, and I do not round my strokes. Every day I will write your wrists. And one day, Harry, I will write down that your wrists are the wrists of a boy who has been kept the whole way, and on that day I will read the whole account back to you, from the beginning, so that you will know exactly how far you came, and exactly who was keeping the count." He put the plate down. "No one kept your count before. That is finished. You have an account now, in the nation's own hand, and it is a growing account, which is the only kind a goblin loves." Harry thought about this while he chewed. "Everybody here writes things down," he observed. "Everything," Grivnick agreed. "It is the whole of what we are. A wizard forgets and calls it forgiveness and moves on and leaves the account unbalanced and wonders why the world keeps coming out wrong. A goblin writes it down, the good and the bad, the debt and the payment. We forget nothing, Harry, and this frightens wizards because they think a thing written down is a thing held against you." He showed his teeth, the goblin not smile. "But an account is not held against you. An account is how we know you are real. You have been written down, now, ward, in the nation's iron. You cannot be lost." Do you understand what that is worth to a boy who was kept in a house that photographed the other child? Harry did understand in the wordless way and did not have anything to say, and so he did the thing he had begun to do in the deep that he had never done in the other house, which was to lean a half-inch toward the warm thing. And Grivnak did not move away, and they sat like that a while, the goblin at his accounts and the boy at his bread, in the warm thing coal light. And neither of them said anything, and it was the best part of Harry's day. In the second week, a goblin came to measure him for clothes, and Harry did not understand what was happening because no one had ever measured him for anything. His clothes had always arrived pre-shrunk from Dudley, gray and vast, and the idea that a garment might be made toward the shape of him was so far outside his experience that he stood very still while the goblin ran a knotted cord along his arm and murmured figures and waited, warily, to find out what he had done wrong. The goblin was called Threnna, and she made the close-cut leathers the wardens wore, and she did not, as a rule, make anything for children. And she had asked to make Harry's clothes herself, though Grivnak did not tell Harry that. Surian, Stinny setting hinder thing complaint. Said anything about it, but she wrote the wrist figure down separately on its own small plate, and Harry did not know why, and Grivnak, watching from the bench, knew exactly why. She was going to make the cuffs a little loose on purpose, with room in them. Because she had seen the finder's plate too, everyone had, and she was making clothes not for the boy he would grown the whole way, sir them. But the hell of Karamur pretending humbuv Kim, but Kim teach. When the clothes came 3 days later, Harry put them on in the small warm room alone, the way he did everything to do with his body, quickly and privately braced. And then he stood, and they fit. Not vast, not cinched, not gray, but made dark and warm and clothes and his, with a little room in the cuffs, and Harry looked down at himself in clothes that had been made toward his own shape by someone who had wanted to make them, and he did a thing he did not expect and could not stop, which was that he sat down on the floor in his new clothes, and Grivnak found him like that, and did not ask, and did not haul him up, and did not say what's wrong in the bright false voice grown people used. He sat down on the floor too, which no adult had ever done, in the middle of his own working day with a plate of accounts under his arm, and waited. And after a while Harry said, into his sleeves, in a small muffled voice, the whole of it, the thing he did not have the words for, and found the words for, anyway, because the deep had taught him that ugly and true was worth more and false. They're the right size. They are, Grivnak said. Nobody ever... Harry stopped. Everything was always Dudley's. Everything was always too big, so everyone could see I was. He did not finish. He did not have to. I know, Grivnak said. I read your wrists in a front room, and I knew before you told me. Here is a true thing, Ward, and you may keep it. A garment made too big for a child on purpose is a message, and the message is, you do not matter enough to be measured. You received that message every day for 6 years, in gray, and you were right to receive it, because it was true in that house. And now you have received a different message, in leather, made by a warden's own hand. And it is also true, and its message is the opposite one. And you will receive it every day from now, because Threnna left room in the cuffs, which means she made them believing you will grow, which means someone in this world is now certain you have a future, certain enough to sew it into your sleeves. He rose and put out his long florid line, grow into the cuffs. And when they are finally too small, we will not hand you down someone else's. We will measure you again and make you new ones, toward the boy you have become, forever, because that is what a household does, and you are of the household does, and you are of the household. Now come. Agnella has made something with the river fish you lost the argument about, and it is not to be missed, and a boy in new clothes should be seen in them. Haka. He was not, of course, an easy ward. Grivnak had known he would not be, and had said so to the lore masters, and had been right. A child who has been kept small learns when he is at last given room to test every wall of it, because he does not believe the room is real until he has pushed on all 4 walls and found them holding. Harry pushed. In the second week he ran off from Agnella's kitchen while she was arguing with a supply warden about the price of riverfish. Goblins argued about prices the way wizards breathe, constantly and with enormous satisfaction, and he got himself lost in the lower forge galleries where a 5-year-old had absolutely no business being, among the drop shafts and the quench pools and the great slow machines, and the whole deep, when it was discovered, did a thing that no house Harry had ever lived in had done. It looked for him. He did not know that at first. He was 3 galleries down in the warm dark, having found a low ledge to sit on where he could watch a smith he did not know pour something white hot from a crucible into a mold, which was the most wonderful thing Harry had ever seen, and he had entirely lost track of everything else in the wonder of it, the way 5-year-olds do. And then he became aware that the hammers had stopped. All of them. The whole ringing background of the deep, the ghost strike that never ceased, had ceased, and into the strange new silence a horn was blowing, low and long. 3 notes and a pause, 3 notes and a pause. 3 notes and a pause, and goblins were moving, fast, with torches calling to one another in the clacking undertongue, and Harry understood, sitting on his ledge, with a lurch of the old fear, that he was in trouble, that he had done a bad thing, that now it would come. They shouted would tout. He made himself small on the ledge. The old reflex, shoulders in and down. And then Dolgruth, keeper of the gates, oldest warden of the nation, who had not run for anything in 40 years, came around the corner of the forge gallery at something that was nearly a run, in his black plate, with a torch, and saw the small gray figure making itself small on the ledge, and stopped. Harry waited for it. Dolgruth crossed the gallery and crouched down. They all crouched down, Harry had noticed, all of them, when they spoke to him. Someone had told them to, or they had worked it out. It was the kindest thing about them, and Harry never got used to it, and the ruined old gate voice, when it came, was not shouting. It was shaking, a little, which Harry had been told gate voices did not do, and it was not shaking with anger. "We could not find you," Dolgruth said. "The horn is the losing horn. It is blown when the deep has lost something it cannot bear to lose. It has not been blown in 11 years, Ward. Do you understand? The whole nation stopped its hammers because we could not find you, and a nation that cannot find its ward is a nation that has failed its oath, and there is no worse thing." He reached out slowly, and did not grab, and put one scarred hand on Harry's small shoulder, and the shoulder was still pulled in. Small braced, and Dolgruth felt it, and understood it, and something in the ancient scarred face. "You are making yourself small," Dolgruth said quietly, "because you think you have done a bad thing and now the bad will come. Listen to me, Ward, because I am very old and I do not say things twice. You did do a foolish thing. The forge galleries will kill a child. There are shafts here that go down farther than the light, and pools that would boil you, and you must never, never come here without a warden. And that is a true rule, and I will hold you to it." The hand on his shoulder was steady, but no bad is coming. Not the kind you are braced for. We do not blow the losing horn for a thing we mean to punish. We blow it for a thing we love and have mislaid. You are not in trouble, Ward. You are found. There is a whole world of difference between those two, and you have never been let to learn it, and you are going to learn it now. Down here, if it takes us the rest of your childhood. You are not in trouble. You are found. And Harry Potter, on the ledge in the forge gallery, with the losing horn still echoing and the whole nation's hammers stopped for him, uncurled. Slowly, shoulder by shoulder, and he kazijin at it. It was the last time he ran off, not because he was afraid to. Because he had learned that day the difference between in trouble and found, and having learned it, he did not need to test that particular wall again. It held. He had pushed on it as hard as a 5-year-old could push, and it had held. And it had blown a horn, and it had come looking with torches and stopped its hammers, and Harry believed it now. The room was real. Okay. The wards proper, the great warding, the thing that made Harry not merely a guest of the deep but a body the deep itself would defend, came in the 4th week, and it came as a ceremony because everything of weight in the deep came as a ceremony, and Grivnak spent 3 days preparing Harry for it. Because a ceremony sprung on a child is a fright, and a ceremony explained to a child is a gift. There is old magic in the deep, Grivnak told him, sitting on the low bench in the small warm room while Harry arranged and rearranged a set of iron counters Vexrin had given him, sourly, muttering that a ward of the nation ought at least to learn to reckon and not grow up an enumerate wizard. You have felt some of it. The light that comes to meet you. The way the losing horn found you. That is the deep, keeping account of what is in it. Right now, Harry, the deep knows you are here the way it knows a guest is here. It is polite to you. It lights your way. It will not let you fall down a shaft if a warden is near. But a guest is not a ward. We swore to keep you, and keeping is more than politeness. So there will be a warding. We will ask the deep itself. The old magic, the deep magic, older than the lore masters, older than the oath, to take you into its own account, not as a guest, as ours. As a thing, the deep will defend the way it defends the gold in the deep vaults and the children between the roots. Do you understand what that means? Will it hurt? Harry asked. It was the practical question of 5, and Grivnak respected it. No, Grivnak said. It is not that kind of magic. There is no wizard wand and no pain. There is only a place and old words and you standing in the place while the words are said and the deep deciding whether to take you. And it will decide to take you, Harry, because the oath has already told it to, and the deep does not argue with an oath sworn at the 3rd gate, but you must stand in the place yourself, of your own will, because the deep will not ward a thing that does not wish to be warded, any more than we would carry off a child who did not wish to come. So I am telling you now, so that on the day, you may choose it with your eyes open. You will be asked to stand in the deep place and be made ours. You may say no. Nothing will change if you say no. You will still be kept, still be fed if you are lost. But you will be a guest the deep is kind to, and not a ward the deep will die for. That is the difference, and it is yours to choose. Harry lined up his iron counters in a row and thought about it, in the serious way of a child given a serious thing, and asked the question under the question. If I'm ours? Harry said, trying the word. Does that mean I can't ever go back? Grivnak was quiet a moment, because it was a better question than a 5-year-old should have been able to ask, and because it deserved a true answer, and not a comfortable one. It means you belong here, Grivnak said. It does not mean you are a prisoner here. Those are different, Harry, and wizards confuse them, and I will not. When you are grown, the oath ends, and you may go anywhere in the wide world, up into the light, out among the wizards, wherever you choose, and you will always be able to come back, because a warded thing can always come home. That is what a ward is. Being ours is not a wall around you. It is a floor under you. You can walk anywhere on a floor. You just cannot fall through it. He leaned forward. You have spent your life with walls and no floor. I am offering you the opposite. A floor and no walls. Will you stand in the deep place and let the deep put a floor under you that nothing in the world can pull out? Yes, said Harry, and did not have to think about it any further than that, because he had never in his life been offered a floor. The warding was held in the Great Hall, before the whole nation, and Harry, who had been frightened of it in the abstract, found on the day that he was not frightened at it. Found on the day that he was not frightened at all. Because the whole thing had been arranged, he slowly understood, so that a child would not be frightened. There was no dark. They had woken the coal light in the roots all the way up, higher than Harry had ever seen it go, so that for once, the Great Hall had a ceiling you could nearly find, a warm, distant vault of living gold. There were the Goblin children at the front. Someone had put them at the front, deliberately, so that Harry would see faces his own size. And the one who had stuck out her tongue at Grivnak in the first chapter of this story, though Harry did not know that, stuck out her tongue at Harry now, and Harry, delighted, stuck his out back, and a ripple of the clacking laughter went through the whole solemn hall, and Marrowgrand, at the black iron table, did not stop it, because a warding that begins with 2 children making faces is a warding that will hold. Then Marrowgrind rose, and the hall came down to silence, and the Keeper of Oaths spoke the old words, in the deep script's tongue, the words that took a thing into the deep's own account. And Grivnak stood beside Harry and murmured the meaning to him as she went, so that the ward would know what was being said over him, because a thing said over you in a tongue you do not know is a fright, and a thing said over you and explained is a gift. And Grivnak had decided, weeks ago, in a clean front roof, that this child had hid chatty at. We take this one into the deep, Marrowgrind said, and Grivnak murmured it. Not as a guest, as ours. Let the stone know his step. Let the light rise to meet him unbidden. Let the gates open to his hand. Let the losing horn blow for him until the deep itself is lost. He is warded of the nation, kept of the household, held of the oath, and what the deep holds does not fall. And Harry, standing in the deep place in the warm gold light before the whole nation and the Goblin children his own size, felt the floor come. He did not have a word for it, but it came, a settling, a deep quiet thing, as if the whole mountain under him had shifted a fraction of an inch to take his weight, as if the ground had said, yes, this one, I have him now. And it was not frightening. It was the opposite of frightening. It was the thing Harry had wanted so badly, and for so long that he had stopped knowing it had a name. He was held, not by a person, though there were persons, by the place itself, by the whole warm, patient deep, by a floor that nothing in the world could pull out. He looked up at Grivnak, and Grivnak looked down at him, and made no mark on any plate, because some things are not written down in runes. They are written in the boy's own uncurled shoulders, and Grivnak read them, and was, for once, entirely satisfied. Aintu aha. The Goblin child who had stuck out her tongue was named Rurga, and she was 7, which she informed Harry within a minute of meeting him was 2 whole years older than him and therefore made her the boss of any game they played. And Harry, who had never played a game in his life and had no basis on which to argue, accepted this without complaint, which annoyed Rurga enormously, because half the fun of being the boss was the argument. You are supposed to say it is not fair, Rurga told him, exasperated, on the polished black floor of a side gallery where the nation's children played their running games among the low roots. When I say I am the boss because I am older, you say it is not fair, and then we argue, and then I win because I am older. That is the game. Oh, said Harry. He considered this. Then, explain me the juret. It was as far as Harry could to high cool could to say to but not nothing at all about whether being older made you the pulled rolled in town. Whether boss got to go for first. About whether better told go for first acted to go to first harken into hard to you for to set out the sister sinch free out and the chadelshin maul this hatch gun about. He had not known that. In the other house, disagreement was the thing that came just before the trouble. You learn to smell it coming and to make yourself small ahead of it. Here it was kinding. But how later? Which was the worst insult a Goblin child possessed? And Harry shouted back that he was a wizard, which stopped Rurga cold for a second. And then she said, with the flattening logic of 7, well, you are a stupid one then, because you cannot even throw, and threw a counter that landed dead in the center of the ring. And Harry laughed so hard he sat down on the floor, and that was the moment. Grivnak, watching from the gallery mouth, Mati dade pet be kaitis. It did it butts that might dead it wanted Karshwarudek. Rurga took him afterward, flushed and friendly now that the argument was properly won, to the place she said he had to see, which was the story hollow, where the old ones told the tellings. "You have to hear your one," she said, tugging him by the too big sleeve. "Everybody has a telling. You have the best one. It has the gate in it." Dalgruth tells it, and he was there. He is 100 million years old. Come on. The story hollow was a small round chamber off the great hall where the roots came down close and the coal light was low and red, and the floor was worn into a shallow bowl by 10,000 years of children sitting in it, and Harry sat in the bowl with Rugga and a dozen other goblin children, small in the red light, and Dalgruth, keeper of the gates, came and sat with them, which the children clearly regarded as an enormous event, and told the telling. He did not tell it the way Grivnak had told it in the front room, as a fact to be proven. He told it the way the deep told its true things to its children, as a telling with the old rhythm in it, and the children mouthed the refrains along with him, because they knew it, they had all grown up on it, and Harry sat in the middle of them, and heard, for the first time, the story of his own blood told as a thing a whole people had loved for 91 years. In the 43rd year of the stewardship of Nagnok, son of Nagnok, Dalgruth began, and the children chorused, "Son of Nagnok, soft." The low deep flooded. The old seals failed, and the rivers came in, and the water rose in the working halls past the third gate, where our smiths and wardens were at their work, 40 of them, and the water rose faster than they could climb. He let the fire pop in the low red dark, and there was a wizard in the deep that day on the bank's business, where a wizard had no business being, and when the horn blew, not the losing horn, ward, the drowning horn, which is worse, the wizards on the upper stair went up, as wizards do, toward the light and the air and the safe, all but one. All but one, the children breathed. One wizard went down, against the water, against the sense of it. A warder of the House of Potter with more courage than wit, the tellings say, and we say it fondly, because his one of wit is the reason 40 of ours are not 30 of ours. He went down to the third gate, where the working that held the water was failing, and he set his own strength into it, alone, with his own 2 hands and his own life for fuel, and he held the gate. How long? Asked a small goblin on cue. It was part of the telling. Every child asked it. Longer than a man should be able, Dalgruth said, and then longer than that. Long enough for 30 of the 40 to come up through the gate he held, out of the drowning dark, into the air. 30. He held it for 30. And when the 30th was through, the working failed, all at once, and the water took the gate, and it took him, and he went under in the dark of the third gate, spent to the last of himself, for a nation that was not his own. The fire popped. The children were silent. This was the silent part. Even Rugga was silent. "And I went in after him," Dalgruth said, and his ruined voice dropped. "Because he had held our gate, and you do not leave at a gate the one who held it. And I found him in the black water, and I brought him up. And he weighed nothing. The water had wrung him out, and I bought him in the black water, and I brought him up. And he weighed nothing. The water had wrung him out, and I did not think he would live. But he lived, and when he could speak, I was there." The stewards asked him what he would have of the nation, for the 30 he had held the gate for, and they meant gold, ward. They meant more gold than a wizard sees in a life. Dalgruth looked, then, directly at Harry, small in the middle of the children, in the low red light, and he said no. He was gray as a fish and half in the next world, and he waves the gold away with a hand that could barely lift, and he said, "I have no need of gold. I have a child coming, my first. And I have looked into the dark today, and I know now that any child of mine might someday be left in the dark with no one to hold the gate. That is the only thing I fear. So if you would pay me in that. Swear that if ever a child of my blood is left with no one keeping him, the deep will keep him. Hold that gate from my blood as I held yours, and we are more than paid." Dalgruth spread his scarred old hands, and the nation took it to the Undermoot because it was too large for the bank, and the Undermoot judged the debt true and swore it, the whole nation, sealed hot at this gate, and filed it, and the years went by, and the wizard's child was born, and grew, and had a child of her own, and that child of her own, and that child of the old gate voice gentled to nothing. That child is sitting in the story hollow tonight, in the bowl the children have worn. Sight night. That is the telling of the third gate. That is your telling, ward. It is the best one we have. Harry sat in the worn bowl in the red light, small among the goblin children, and did not say anything, because there was nothing a 5-year-old could say to being told that his great-grandfather had drowned holding a door so that 30 strangers could live, and had spent his last strength asking not for gold but for Harry, for a child not yet born, out of the one fear a brave man had that. His blood might someday be left in the dark with no one to hold the gate. Harry did not have words for it. But Rugga, beside him, who was 7 and bossy and had no patience for silences, leaned over and said, matter-of-factly, in the way of a child stating a settled fact of the world, "So we held it, the gate, for you. That is why you are here. Everybody knows." And she said it as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world, as if of course the whole nation had held a gate for 91 years for one small boy. Why would they not? That was simply what the deep did. And it was, Harry understood, sitting in the bowl exactly that ordinary and exactly that enormous, both at once, and he was beginning to learn that this was how all the truest things were. He leaned a half-inch toward Werga, the way he leaned toward the worm thing. And Werga, who did not know she was being paid the highest compliment Harry Potter had, elbowed him companionably and said he still threw like a wizard. Anti-ara. Not everything in the deep was warm, and Grivnick did not pretend to Harry that it was. Because a floor and no walls meant Harry was free to meet the whole nation, and the whole nation was not, uniformly, delighted to have a wizard child in its household. Vexrin, keeper of the reckonings, made no secret of his opinion, which was that a ward was a ward and a debt was a debt. And he would pay both to the last coin, and that this did not require him to pretend to like wizards, whom he had found across 400 years of dealings to be a shifty, forgetful, oath-breaking people who wore their poverty of memory as if it were a virtue. He said all of this to Harry directly, sourly, over the iron counters while teaching him to reckon because Vexrin had appointed himself Harry's tutor in numbers on the grounds that someone had to, and that he would not have the ward of the nation growing up unable to tell a true account from a salted one like the average wizard. Your people cannot hold a figure in their heads past supper, Vexrin told him, moving the counters. It is why they are always poor and always surprised about it. You will not be like them. You are ours now, and ours can reckon. Add these. Harry, who had been told his whole life that he was stupid, added them, slowly, and got it wrong. And Vexrin did not sigh or roll his eyes or say honestly, the way the teachers at the school in the other world did. He simply moved the counters back and said, no, again. A figure is not shameful for being wrong. It is only wrong, and a wrong figure corrected is worth more than a right figure guessed, because you know how you got it. Again. And Harry did it again, and got it right, and Vexrin grunted, which Harry had learned was Vexrin's highest praise, and moved to a harder sum, and Harry understood dimly that the sour old treasurer who did not like wizards was, in the only way Vexrin had, being kind to him. That again, a wrong figure corrected is worth more than a right figure guessed was a kindness. Maybe the biggest one anyone had ever done him, because it meant that being wrong was allowed, that being right was being right, that you were not thrown in the cupboard. But it chatsmeet kens trinits, you shravriskans them. Vexrin did not like wizards and never would, and Vexrin was one of the kindest things that ever happened to Harry Potter. And both of these were true at once. And Harry was learning, in the deep, that most true things came in pairs like that, and that you did not have to make them agree. There were grudges too, older and colder than Vexrin's sourness. There was a warden named Karum who had lost kin in a goblin rebellion that the wizards had put down with particular cruelty a century back, and who could not look at Harry without seeing, for a moment, the ones that had done it, and who kept his distance, correctly and courteously, and did his duty by the ward without ever once warming to him. Grivnick did not force it. He will not hurt you, Grivnick told Harry when Harry asked, blunt, why the tall warden with the burn scar never crouched down to talk to him like the others. He would die for you because you are warded, and he is a warden. And that is not a small thing, Harry. A man who will die for you but not smile at you is giving you the larger half, but he lost people to wizards, real people, in a real cruelty. And it is not yours to fix, and it is not his to forget, because we do not forget, and I will not ask him to pretend. You may nod to him. He will nod back. That is the whole of it, and it is honest, and honest is worth more than warm when warm would be a lie. And Harry, who had a great deal of experience with grown people pretending to feelings they did not have, found that he preferred Caring's honest, cold nod to any amount of false warmth, and nodded to the tall warden every day gravely, and the warden nodded back, gravely, and that was their whole relationship for years, and it was a good one. And Harry never once mistook it for anything it was not. This was the thing the deep taught him, in the weeks and months of that first warm, sheltered season, more than the reckoning or the reading of the deep script or the names of the gates, that people were real, and various, and did not have to be all one thing. Agnella loved him with a ladle. Vexrin taught him with a grudge. Dulgruth guarded him with a grief. Karen protected him with a coldness. Marrowgrind kept him with a law. And Kruvnik, who had looked at his wrists in a clean front room and found that he wished to Grivnick kept his account, every day, in the nation's own iron, and read his wrists, and sat on the low bench while he ate, and answered his blunt, terrible questions with true answers, and did the one thing that none of the others quite, which was to let Harry lean, and in der Nalt, slowly, at first, the way a hollow light thing grows when it is finally fed. Grivnick's account recorded it, mark by mark, wrist by wrist, the true unrounded figures of a boy coming back the whole way. By the turning of the season, his shoulders had stopped pulling in at loud sounds. By deeper in, he had learned to argue about prices with the supply wardens, which delighted the whole nation, a 5-year-old wizard child haggling over river fish and broken trade tongue with his hands on his hips, in exact imitation of Agnella, and losing, and coming back the next day to lose again, cheerfully, because he had learned that arguing about prices was not fighting, it was play, it was how goblins loved each other. Out loud, and Harry, who had never been played with Hituke, took 8 hats, and Grivnick taught him the deep script, not the reckoning runes. Those were Vexrin's province, and Vexrin guarded his province jealously. The deep script, the ceremonial cut, The hand you wrote for the things that outlived money. Grivnik had not meant to. It was not a Ward's ordinary schooling, but Harry had watched him strike the small, hard characters onto the wax practice plate one evening on the low bench, and had asked, blunt, "Can I do it?" And Grivnik had looked at the child, and thought of a grandmother with a tally rod, and handed him the stylus. "You will do it wrong," Grivnik warned him, "and I will not be gentle about it, because my grandmother was not gentle about it, and she was right. There is one rule above all the others, and it is this. You do not round your strokes. A wizard rounds his letters to make them pretty. A goblin cuts his straight and true and lets them be ugly, because the deep script is not for pretty. It is for true. A rounded stroke is a stroke that is trying to please you, and a thing that is trying to please you is a thing you cannot trust. Cut it straight, Harry. Cut it true. Let it be ugly. Ugly and true is worth more than pretty and false. That is the whole of the deep script, and very nearly the whole of my people." He set Harry's small hand on the stylus, and did not correct the grip too soon, and watched the boy cut his first character into the wax, slow tongue between his teeth, and it was crooked and heavy-handed and entirely straight, not one rounded stroke in it because Harry had listened, and Grivnak looked at the ugly true character a wizard child had cut and felt something he did, not as a rule, permit himself. "Is it right?" Harry asked, braced. The old bracing, ready to be told it was wrong and stupid. "It is ugly," Grivnak said, "and it is true. And there is not one rounded stroke in it, and my grandmother would have let you keep all your knuckles, which she did for almost no one." He did not smile. Goblins did not. But he showed his teeth, and Harry had learned by now that this was the warm thing, and leaned toward it. "You listen. Ward, wizards do not listen. It is their great failing. They are so busy being clever they never hear the one rule that matters. You heard it and you cut it true the first time. Again. A whole line this time. And Harry, he tapped the crooked character with one claw. When you are grown and up in the light, and some wizard tells you that you are only a boy the goblins keep out of charity, you will remember that you can cut the deep script true, which not one wizard in 1,000 years has ever been taught. Because we do not teach it to wizards. We taught it to you. Because you are not a boy we keep. You are ours. There is a difference, and it is cut straight into everything down here. And you will carry it up into the light, where they have all forgotten how to cut anything true at all." Harry cut a whole line. It took him the rest of the evening, and it was ugly, and it was true, and Grivnak kept the wax plate and did not tell Harry he had kept it, and it was in his own cell, on the shelf, on the day everything changed. He did not think about the other house. Grivnak watched for it, carefully, because a child does not leave a place like number 4 cleanly, and it comes back at night, and it came back for Harry some nights, in the small warm room, and on those nights, Agnella would come with warm milk and a hard biscuit and sit her broad impatient self on the floor by his low bed and complain, at length, in a lulling grievance drone, about the price of river fish and the laziness of supply wardens and the general decline of everything since her grandmother's day, until the sound of a goblin gave it and fat, and Grivnak, passing in the passage, would hear the grievance drone through the door, and the small even breathing under it, and go on to his accounts, satisfied and make no mark, because that too was not a thing you wrote in runes. But up above, in the light, the wizarding world had not been idle in those weeks. The Wizengamot had been convened. The court had been called. Owls had crossed and recrossed the ordinary world carrying the strangest summons in the history of magical Britain, and the deep had answered everyone gravely, in writing, on iron, that it was content to stand. And now the day of the standing was near, when the nation of the deep would come up out of the earth into the wizard's own high court, with its ward, and set. 91 of that half, it had its sound. Grivnak told Harry about it plainly, 3 days before on the low bench, because a thing sprung on a child is a fright, and a thing explained is a gift. "We are going up," Grivnak said, "into the light, into the wizard's great court, where they will try to decide whether they can take you back." Harry looked at him, and his shoulders did not pull in, because he had a floor now and nothing could pull it out, and he asked, in the clear light unbothered voice, the only question that mattered, the one he had asked at the third gate, the one he already knew the answer to, and asked anyway. Because asking it and hearing the answer was a kind of home now. "Will you still be there?" "I will still be there," Grivnak said. "And so will the whole of the deep, standing behind you. All of it, the old ones and the little ones, in the wizard's own court, in the light. You will not stand up there alone, Harry. You will never stand anywhere alone again. That is what warded means." He rose and took up his plate and put the reckoning pen behind his ear, and at the door he paused, and looked back at the boy on the bench who had come to the deep hollow light and braced for the trouble that never came, and he said the thing he did not, as a rule, say, because he did not, as a rule, want things, and had stopped pretending, weeks ago, that this was still true, what things, and had stopped pretending, weeks ago, that at this is what. Tomorrow we teach the wizards what a floor is. They have never once had one, all of them, in their whole bright forgetful history, and it is going to be a very great shock. Chapter 4, End. Chapter 5, The Standing. The Wizengamot had never once in 700 years been made to wait. It was the body that made others wait. Ministers waited on it, and petitioners, and the accused. It convened when it chose and rose when it chose, and the whole architecture of its great chamber was built to teach a person, the moment he entered, exactly how small he was and how long he might be kept standing. The benches climbed in tiers of black stone toward a ceiling lost in shadow charms, and the 50 full members sat in plum robes with silver W's at the breast, high above the floor, looking down. And on the floor, in the center, alone, was where you stood to be judged. On the morning of the standing, the 50 came in and took their high seats and looked down at the floor, and the floor was empty, and they waited. They did not like it. Perpetua Wick, who had positioned herself at the clerk's table with her notebook and her 40 years of procedure, watched them not like it and made a note. The Deep had sent word, on iron as always, that the nation would present itself at the 3rd hour, and it was past the 3rd hour, and the greatest wizards in Britain sat in their plum robes and discovered that they were being made to wait, and had no mechanism for it, because you cannot hold in contempt a party that has not yet arrived, and you cannot start without the party you have summoned. And so they sat, and the minutes went, and the chamber grew were 50 people's offrent. Albus Dumbledore, in the chief warlock's high central seat, did not fidget and did not consult the door, and Perpetua Wick watched him not do it and made a second note, because the not doing was a performance too, and she had learned across 4 decades that the great wizard's performances were worth watching, precisely because they were so very good. He had spent the week since Privet Drive, she knew, doing what Albus Dumbledore did, gathering. He had researched the oath. He had consulted the oldest treaty law the ministry held, and some that it did not. He had, she was fairly sure, gone quietly to certain persons about certain older matters concerning the boy that were not written in any ministry file. Matters of prophecy and protection that Perpetua Wick did not know the shape of, and knew better than to ask about. He had come to this chamber prepared, and he had come, she judged, in good faith. Which was the thing that made him dangerous, and the thing that made him great. Both at once, he genuinely believed that the boy was safest under the blood ward at Privet Drive, that some old and terrible protection lived in that house and that bloodline, and that whatever the goblins offered, it could not offer that, and that therefore it was his duty, however it looked, to try to bring the child back. He was not a villain. Perpetua Wick had known villains. The chief warlock was not one. He was a good man who had decided, years ago, a thing about the boy, and had built a great deal upon the decision, and could not now easily undecide it, and would fight for it in this chamber with every subtle weapon he owned. And that, she thought, making a third note, was going to be the whole trouble of the morning. Not wickedness against goodness, but goodness against a floor. At the 4th hour, the doors of the Wizengamot opened, and the nation of the deep came in. They did not come as a mob, and they did not come as an army. They came as a procession, and the procession had an order, and the order was the point, because the whole of Goblin law was the idea that things done in the correct order cannot afterward be called disorder. First came 2 heralds in the black folded plate, and they did not bow to the 50, which had never happened in that chamber, and a murmur went along the high benches at it. Then came the lore masters, Vexrin, sour and upright, running his counters, and behind him, carried in a low chair of black iron because she was too old to walk the distance and too proud to be helped, Marrowgrint, keeper of the oaths, so old the chamber's light seemed to give way before her, and the murmur on the benches died when she came in. Because even wizards who had never seen her knew, the way you know a mountain is a mountain, that they were looking at something older than their court. Then came Dolgruth, keeper of the gates, in his plate, walking slow, scarred, unhurried. Then Grivnak, in a clerk's plain black, carrying the warm iron plate of the oath in one hand, and then, in the middle of them, small in new clothes that fit, that was the thing the whole chamber saw and could not stop seeing, that the clothes fit, that someone had made this child clothes that fit him, walked Harry Potter 5 years old, in his taped spectacles, with his black hair that would not lie down, holding Grivnak's free hand, looking up and up at the tiers of plum-robed wizards climbing into the shadow, and not making himself small. That was the image that went out of that chamber and across magical Britain by nightfall, carried by 50 tongues that could not help themselves. Not the heralds, not the ancient keeper in her iron chair, not the armed wardens. The boy, the small boy in clothes that fit, walking into the highest court in the wizarding world in the middle of a goblin nation, holding a goblin's hand, and looking up at the 50 most powerful witches and wizards in Britain, with the frank, unfrightened, faintly curious expression of a child who has recently learned the difference between being in trouble and being found, and has decided, on the whole, that he is among the found. The procession stopped at the center of the floor, the place where you stood to be judged, and Marrowgrind from her iron chair, in a voice that was quiet and filled the whole climbing dark of the chamber, spoke first before the chief warlock could open the proceeding, and in the speaking, took the proceeding out of his hands. "We are not here to be judged," she said. "Let that be the first thing written in your record, clerk." And Perpetua Wick, at the table, wrote it, because it was true and because she had decided some time ago whose side the truth was on this morning. "We stand on the floor because it is the center of your chamber, and we are courteous. But the nation of the deep does not stand on any floor to be judged. We stand to inform. The oath is sworn, the debt is due, the ward is ours. These are not questions before this court, because a wizard's court has no jurisdiction over a goblin's oath, any more than your Wizengamot may rule upon the tides. We have come up into your light, in your own high chamber, before all your power gathered, for one reason only, so that no wizard, ever, in any year to come, may say the deep took the child in the dark, or by stealth, or without answering to the world. We answer to the world. Here we are, ask what you will. We will stand, and we will answer. And at the end, the answer will be the same as it was at the beginning, because it was sworn correctly, and we do not break what is sworn correctly. Chief Warlock, she turned her ancient head, slow, toward the high central seat. You place the child. You will wish to contest. It is your right to try, and our courtesy to hear you. Try. There was a silence in the Wizengamot such as the old chamber had rarely held, and then Albus Dumbledore rose in his plum robes, tall and grave, and did not try any of the small things a lesser man would have tried. He did not dispute the herald's failure to bow, or the ancient keeper's claim of jurisdiction, or the procession's order. He set all of that aside, visibly, the way a master craftsman sets aside the wrong tools, and he came, directly and in good faith and with the whole weight of his greatness behind it, to the one true thing he had. I will not contest the oath, Dumbledore said, and the murmur that ran the benches at that was the largest yet, because half the chamber had come to watch the Chief Warlock demolish a goblin technicality, and he had just declined to. I have read it. I have read it in your own iron and in our oldest treaty law, and it is sworn correctly, and it is due, and Keeper Marrowgrind is right that this court has no power over it. I concede the oath. He let that land. I will contest one thing only, and I will contest it not as a point of law, but as a plea, because it is the only ground I have, and because I believe it, and I would rather stand here and lose honestly than win by a trick. He looked down, past the 50, past the lore masters, to the small figure on the floor. The child's mother died to protect him. She died giving him a protection older and deeper than any ward I know how to make. A protection that lives in her blood, and in her sister's blood, and in the house where her sister lives. So long as Harry calls that house his home, that protection holds, and while it holds there is a certain enemy, an enemy I will not name in open chamber, but which some here will understand, that cannot touch him. That is why I placed him there, not for love. I will not pretend the house gave him love. I have heard the goblin's account of his wrists, and I do not dispute one word of it, and it shames me. I placed him there for safety, of a kind the deep, for all its power, cannot provide, because it is not made of stone or gold or oaths. It is made of his mother's death, and my plea to this court, and to the nation of the deep, is only this, that whatever is decided about the child's keeping, we not, in keeping him warm, leave him open to the one thing his mother died to shut out. He spread his hands. I would rather he were cold and alive than warm and unguarded against that. That is the whole of my contest. It is not law. It is a frightened old man's plea, and I make it plainly, because the child deserves plainness, and I have not always given it to him. It was, Perpetua Wick wrote, the finest thing she had ever heard said in that chamber, and it was true, and it very nearly worked, because a plea made in good faith by a great man about a dead mother's love is the hardest thing in the world to answer, and the chamber turned, as one, to the goblins, to see whether the deep had an answer, or whether the deep, for all its iron, would be undone by the one currency it did not deal in. And it was not Marrowgrin who answered, and it was not Dulgruth, and it was not Grivnak. It was Harry. Aha. Aha. He had been listening. That was the thing no one in the chamber had accounted for, because wizards did not, as a rule, account for what a 5-year-old was hearing. They spoke over children, around them, about them, the way the other house had spoken about him. But Harry had spent his whole life in a house where the safest thing was to listen, to watch the room, to understand the wordless shapes of what the grown people were really saying under the words, and he had listened to the tall grave wizard talk about his mother, and he had understood more of it than anyone on the high benches would have believed, and he tugged once on Grivnak's hand. Grivnak looked down at him. He said, "My mum," Harry said. It was not quiet. The chamber's charms carried it up into every tier. A small, clear light, unbothered voice in the enormous, solemn dark. The tall one. He said, "My mum died to keep me safe." The chamber went very still. Grivnak crouched down. He did it without hesitation and without checking the 50, in the center of the highest court in the wizarding world, so that his eyes were level with the child's eyes, the way he had done in the Begonias, the way they all did now, and he answered the ward of the nation as if the chamber were empty, because to Grivnak, in the ways that counted. It was the counted. He did say that, Grivnak said, and it is true, Harry, your mother died to keep you safe. That is the truest thing anyone has said in this room, and I will not have it drowned in law. Your mother loved you enough to die for you, and she made a protection out of the dying, and it is real, and the Chief Warlock is right to fear for it. Harry thought about this on the floor of the Wizengamot, in front of everyone, with his tongue between his teeth the way he did over the deep script. But she's not there anymore, Harry said. At the house. It's Aunt Petunia there, and Aunt Petunia doesn't. He stopped and reached, with a 5-year-old's blunt hands, for a thing he did not have the words for, and found the words anyway, because the deep had taught him that ugly and true was worth more than pretty and false. Aunt Petunia kept the safe part, the keep the bad man out part. But she didn't keep me. There's a difference. He looked up at Grivnak, checking, the way he checked. Isn't there? You said. A guard and a ward. Keeping the bad thing out isn't the same as keeping me. The house kept the bad man out and nobody kept me, and the thread magic could tell. It went all around me and there was nobody holding. He turned, then, and looked up, all the way up, at Albus Dumbledore in his high seat, and he was 5 and unafraid and entirely serious, and he asked the chief warlock of the Wizengamot the blunt, terrible question of the small, the one that undid the whole chamber. Did my mum die so I be safe? Or so I be kept? Because they're not the same, and I don't think she died just so the bad man couldn't get me. I think she died so somebody would keep me. And nobody did. Till the goblins came. No one in the Wizengamot said anything, and Marrowgrind, keeper of the oaths, in her iron chair, so old the light gave way before her, made a sound that took the chamber a moment to understand, because it was dry and it was terrible and it was 90 years deep, and it was laughter, not cruel, not triumphant, the laughter of a very old creature who has waited a very long time to hear a truth said cleanly, and has heard it, at last, from a child. There is the answer to your plea, Chief Warlock, and it was not the deep that gave it to you. It was the ward. You asked us not to leave him open to the enemy his mother died to shut out. Hear the child's answer, because it is wiser than your plea and wiser than my law. A mother does not die so that her child may be shut in a safe box. She dies so that her child may be kept. Safety without keeping is a bolt on the outside of a cupboard door. It shuts the bad thing out, and it shuts the child in, and it holds no one. You gave the boy safety, Chief Warlock, and you called it protection. And it was a cupboard with a good lock, and his mother did not die for a cupboard with a good lock. She died for him, for the whole of him, to be held and grown and kept the whole way, and that we can give and that we have given. And that is why the oath is not only lawful but right, more right than your plea, because your plea would keep his mother's protection and lose the thing his mother wanted the protection for. Dumbledore stood in his high seat and looked down at the small boy who had just told him, correctly, that he had confused safety with keeping, and Perpetua Wick, at the clerk's table, watched the great wizard's face, and saw on it the thing she had waited 40 years to see there and had never quite believed she would. She saw Albus Dumbledore realize he had been wrong, not on a point of law, but on the thing itself, the human thing, the thing he had built a decade of certainty upon, and she saw him, to his eternal and permanent credit, not fight it. The enemy? Dumbledore said slowly, and his voice was not the Chief Warlock's voice now. It was only an old man's. The protection. If the boy leaves the house, the blood word fails, and there is an enemy. Chief Warlock. It was Grivnak who spoke now, rising from his crouch, and his voice had gone back to the audit voice, cold and even, and giving nothing but under it. For the first time in the whole telling, there was something that was not cold at all. You keep speaking of the enemy as though the deep had not considered him. We considered him before we ever climbed into your light. Do you imagine the nation that keeps the gold of Britain 3 miles under the ground, behind gates no wizard living has passed, warded by magic older than your statute, cannot keep one small boy from one enemy? Your blood word keeps him from a single foe, in a single house, so long as he never leaves it. A wall around a cupboard. We do not offer him a wall. We offer him the deep. There is no protection your world has ever devised, no blood word and no Fidelius and no ministry safe house. That is 1/10 so far beyond the reach of any enemy as a boy who is warded of the whole goblin nation and dwells 3 miles beneath the earth behind the 3rd gate. Your enemy cannot find the deep. Your enemy cannot open the gates. Your enemy cannot pass the wardens or the lore masters or the old magic that has kept this nation's secrets since before your enemy's grandfathers were born. You feared we would leave him open. Chief Warlock, we have closed him behind the strongest door in the world, and unlike your cupboard, it locks from the inside and he holds the key because he is not shut in, he is kept. Gribnak paused and let it land, and then he said the last of it quietly, the thing that ended the contest. Your mother's blood protection was real, and it was your best, and I honor it. But it was your best, and ours is better, and it comes with the one thing yours never could. It comes with someone who will look at his wrists every day and write down that he is growing, and read it back to him when he is a man. Safety, Chief Warlock, and keeping. We give both. You gave one and called it enough. It was never enough. Ask the boy. The chamber did not need to ask the boy. The boy had already answered. The boy was standing on the floor of the Wizengamot in clothes that fit, holding a goblin's hand, and there was not one witch or wizard on the 50 high benches who could look at him and at the wall of the other child's photographs the prophet had by now, somehow printed, and believe that the cupboard had been enough. Aka. They deliberated. Wizards deliberate. It is their nature. They could not simply concede a thing without 3 hours of speeches, and the Deep courteous stood on the floor and let them, because the Deep had waited 91 years and could wait an afternoon. The speeches went the way speeches go. There were members who spoke for the dignity of the wizarding world and could not abide the notion of a magical child, the Potter child, the famous child, being raised beneath the earth by creatures they did not trouble to call anything kinder than creatures. And Marrowgrind heard those speeches from her iron chair without expression, because she had heard their like for 1,000 years and knew that contempt is only fear that has not yet met the floor. There were members who worried, sincerely, about the boy's schooling, his magic, his place in the world when he was grown. And to those Grivnak answered, plainly, that the ward would be taught his letters and his numbers and his reckoning better than any wizard child in Britain, that when he was of age he would go to their school if he chose, from the Deep, as a ward of the Deep, and that they might make of that what they would. And the thought of Harry Potter arriving at Hogwarts in the black folded plate of the Deep, warded of the Goblin nation, went round the chamber and silenced a Mrover of the Barrier. Because there was one member who did more than worry, and Perpetua Wick had been waiting for him, because there is one in every chamber. He rose from the middle tier in robes cut finer than the plum standard permitted, a pale aristocratic wizard with a walking stick he did not need, and he addressed the chamber and not the goblins, which was itself the insult, speaking of them in the third person while they stood 10 feet below him on the floor. I wonder, he said, in the drawl that money teaches, whether this body has entirely lost its sense of proportion. We are asked to hand a wizarding child, not merely any child, the Potter child, a child of the sacred line, a child who is arguably the property of our whole world, into the permanent keeping of creatures who launder our gold for a commission, creatures who do not, I note, even trouble to bow to this chamber. I do not doubt their little oath is technically valid. The goblins are nothing if not clever with the small print. It is, after all, the only cleverness they possess. But validity is not the whole of a question. There is such a thing as dignity. There is such a thing as what is fitting. And I put it to this body that it is not fitting for the boy who lived to be raised in a hole in the ground by moneylenders. However technically they may have contrived to acquire him. He sat, pleased with himself, and there was a silence, and into the silence Perpetua Wick fully expected Marrowgrind to answer, or Grivnak, and prepared to write down whatever cold thing the Deep would say. It was Dolgruth who answered, Keeper of the Gates. He had not spoken once in the whole proceeding, and the chamber had half forgotten the scarred old warden in the black plate, and when he lifted his ruined voice the whole room turned, because a voice like that, wrecked and quiet, makes a room lean in. I will answer the wizard, Dolgruth said, because the finder answers law and the keeper answers oaths, and this was neither. This was contempt, and contempt is a warden's business, because contempt is a warden's business, because contempt is what walks in the door just before the harm. He looked up at the pale aristocrat, and he did not raise his voice, and it carried into every tier. You called us moneylenders. You called us creatures who launder gold for a commission. You are not wrong. We do keep your gold. It is honest work, and we are not ashamed of it, though I note that you are ashamed of the gold and not of the keeping, which tells me something about you and nothing about us. But I will tell you what a moneylender did, 91 years ago, that no wizard of the sacred line troubled to do. The low deep flooded, and 40 of us were drowning past a gate no wizard's law required a wizard to reach, and the wizards on the stair went up toward the air, all of them, every sacred line, every fine robe, all but one. One wizard came down, into the water. For creatures who launder gold, he held the gate with his own life until 30 of us came through, and it very nearly killed him, and when we asked him what he wanted, he did not want gold. Wizard, he waved your precious gold away with a dying hand, and he asked us to keep his blood if ever his blood were left with no one to keep it. Dolgruth let it sit. That wizard is the child's own blood. That is the sacred line you speak of, not the fine robes and the walking stick you do not need, but a man who went down into the dark for moneylenders because it was the decent thing, and there was no one else to do it. And when his blood was left in a cupboard by his own kind, by the sacred line, by the fine robes, by every wizard in this chamber who knew a Potter child had been placed somewhere and never once asked where, it was the moneylenders who went down into the dark for him. Again, as we were sworn. You ask what is fitting. I will tell you what is fitting. It is fitting that the blood of the man who held our gate should be kept by the nation whose gate he held. That is the most fitting thing that has happened to that child in 6 years, and it took creatures to do it, because the sacred line was busy being sacred and could not be troubled to look at a boy's wrists. He turned his scarred face from the aristocrat, dismissing him entirely, which was worse than any argument. The warden has answered the contempt. Let the chamber return to its law. The pale aristocrat did not rise again. There was nothing to rise for. The gate voice had not argued with him. It had simply told the truth over him, and the truth had a weight his drawl could not lift, and he sat in his fine robes with the whole chamber no longer looking at him, which for a man of his kind was a small death, and he would carry his grudge out of that chamber and nurse it for years, and it would matter, later, in other stories. But it did not matter that morning because that more the floor, and there were members. Perpetua Wick counted them and made a note of each, because they were the ones who mattered. who simply looked at the boy and at the goblins around him and at the ancient keeper in her iron chair, and understood that they were present at something that did not come twice in a history, the day the wizarding world learned that there was a floor beneath its floor, that the deep had been down there all along keeping its accounts, and that once 91 years ago, a potter had gone down past the gold and knelt at the third gate and asked for a thing no gold could buy, and the nation had said yes and sealed it hot and kept it, all this time in silence, reaching for one child through the earth with a single thread, so that on the day the debt came due, it would not have to go looking. Those members did not make speeches. They sat and they understood. And when it came to the vote, they voted with the understanding and not with the dignity. And the understanding was this: that a world which discovers it has been held, all along, by something older and more faithful than itself, is not diminished by the discovery. It is steadied. A person feels smaller, learning there is a floor beneath the floor, and then he feels for the first time that he might safely stand. Amelia Bohm spoke last and shortest, and it was her speech that ended it, because she spoke not as a member but as the director of magical law enforcement, the officer of the law, the one whose whole pride was in doing the thing correctly. "I placed a guard on this," she said, standing, plain and scarred and unhurried. "Weeks ago, in a suburban street, I told a goblin herald that I would keep my wizards to the order if he proved the oath, and he proved it. Before my eyes, by the chief warlock's own reading and by the oath's own magic. And I kept my wizards to the order, and I have not regretted it for 1 hour since. I've investigated the household. I will not read my findings into this record, because there is a child on the floor and he has heard enough of them, but I will tell you that they are worse than the goblin's account, not better, and that the goblin rounded nothing and softened nothing and could have. I have investigated the placement. I have investigated the 6 years, and I will say plainly, as the officer responsible for the safety of magical children in Britain, that this ministry failed this child utterly from the first day, and that the only party in this entire affair that did not fail him is standing on the floor in armor we spent a century teaching our own children to fear." She let that sit in the chamber. The oath is lawful. The chief warlock concedes it. The child is thriving. You have all seen it. The clothes fit. And I, for one, am done pretending that the question before this body is whether the goblins may keep him. The question before this body, the only question, is whether we have the decency to say thank you. She sat down. "I move we say thank you, and confirm the ward and adjourn and go home and be quietly ashamed, which is the least this child is owed and the most this body has ever managed." The Wizengamot confirmed the ward. It was not unanimous. Nothing in that chamber ever was. But it was not close, and the members who voted against it did so. Most of them, more from the old habit of not conceding to goblins than from any belief that the boy would be better in the cupboard, and they knew it, and it sat ill with them going home. The record, in Perpetua Wick's exact hand, showed the vote and the concession of the chief warlock and the motion of the director of magical law enforcement, and it showed at the foot one line that was not procedure, because the clerk of the Wizengamot had decided that this, once the record would carry a true thing into the future, the wizarding world was this day informed that it does not stand on the bottom. There is a floor beneath the floor, and it keeps its promises, and we would do well to remember it. Aha, aha! The chamber began to empty, slowly, the way a great room empties when the people in it are not quite ready to be done with what they have seen. And Albus Dumbledore came down from the high central seat, alone, past the departing members, and crossed the floor to where the deep still stood, and stopped a courteous distance from Marogrand's iron chair, and did a thing no chief warlock had done in the memory of that chamber. He bowed, not the small nod of one power to another. He bent, an old man all the way, to the keeper of the oaths. "I was wrong," Dumbledore said. "Not on the law. I knew the law before I entered. I was wrong on the thing itself. I built a decade upon the belief that safety was the whole of what I owed the boy, and I was corrected today by the boy, and I find that I am glad to have been. That is not a comfortable thing for a man of my years to say, and I say it because the child has spent his life among people who would not say true things to him, and I will not add my name to that list. I was wrong. He is better kept than I ever kept him. Thank you for keeping him when we did not." Marogrind regarded the great wizard from her iron chair for a long moment, and Grivnak, watching, understood that a thing was being weighed that had nothing to do with law, and everything to do with a harder currency, the one the deep guarded more jealously than gold. Whether a wizard could be trusted. Wizards forgot. That was the oldest goblin grievance. A wizard would swear a thing in the morning and misremember it kindly by night and call the misremembering forgiveness. But a wizard who bowed all the way to the floor and said "I was wrong" out loud, in front of witnesses, and let it be written into the record, that was a wizard doing the one goblin thing, keeping the true account even when it cost him. Marogrind had waited 1,000 years to see a wizard do it, and she did not pretend it had not moved her, because pretending was a wizard's vice. "You may see him," she said. It was not what Dumbledore had asked. He had asked for nothing, and it was, precisely for that reason, worth more than anything he could have asked. Not to take him, not to take him, not to test him, or measure him for your school, or read old prophecies over his sleeping head, and I know about the prophecies, Chief Warlock, do not trouble to arrange your face. to see him. He had a mother who died for him, and a great many people who failed him, and he is now a boy with a nation and no wizards at all in his life. And that is not right either, because he is a wizard, and he will need, someday, to know the world he was born to as well as the world that took him in. You have shamed yourself in this affair, Albus Dumbledore, and you have, in the last 5 minutes, begun to unshame yourself, which is harder and rarer, and the deep does not forget a hard, rare thing any more than it forgets a debt. So, you may come to the third gate when you are asked, and you will be asked, and you will meet the ward on the ward's ground and not on yours, and you will teach him what a wizard should know, honestly and slowly and under our eye, and you will not once, ever, confuse teaching him with owning him. And if you keep that account true, wizard, you will find that the deep can be a friend, and that a friend 3 miles under the earth is worth more than you have the wit yet to know. She lifted one knuckled hand, dismissing at once. Go home and be ashamed tonight. Come back a friend. It is a better road than the one you are on, and the boy will need friends in your world, because your world is about to lose its mind over him, and someone up here in the light had better love him who is not a goblin. Dumbledore bowed again and went. And he was, from that day, exactly what she had told him to be, and it was one of the better things he ever did, and he knew it. Ah ha ha! The wizarding world lost its mind over him. It began before the Wizengamot had even finished emptying, because 50 members cannot witness a thing like the standing and keep it to themselves, and by the evening edition the Daily Prophet had it, and by the morning edition it had grown, and by the second morning it had become the only thing anyone in magical Britain was talking about. In the leaky cauldron and in the queue at the apothecary and over every breakfast table in every wizarding home in the Alls, the boy who lived is the ward of the goblins. They did not know what to do with it. That was the shock, the real one, underneath the headlines. The wizarding world had a settled and comfortable idea of goblins, and the idea was small. Goblins kept the bank. Goblins were clever with gold and surly about it. Goblins lived somewhere under Gringotts and came up to change your galleons and went back down. And you did not think about them any more than you thought about the plumbing, and the not thinking was the whole arrangement, and both sides had, for centuries, found it convenient. And now the plumbing had come up into the highest court in the land, in armor, with an oath older than the ministry, and had claimed the most famous child in Britain, and had been proven right, and had gone back down. And the wizarding world stood in its slippers with the newspaper in its hands and discovered that it had never once, in all its long history, actually looked at the ground it was standing on. There was fear, at first, because fear is what a comfortable people feels when it learns the extent of a thing it had agreed not to see. There were letters to the prophet about goblin overreach, about the safety of magical children, about what it meant that the deep could reach up and take one of theirs, and the Wizengamot could do nothing but say thank you. There were wizards who went to Gringotts and looked at the goblin tellers with a new and uneasy attention, trying to see, behind the counter and the ledgers, the nation and the plate, the third gate, the floor beneath the floor, and the tellers who had always known exactly what they were and had simply not been asked, looked back at the wizards with a flat, patient attention that gave nothing away, and went on counting the gold, and the wizards took their galleons and left, and did not quite look at the plumbing the same way again. But under the fear, and slower and stronger, there was the other thing. The thing Perpetua Wick had seen in the faces of the members who did not make speeches, and it spread through magical Britain over the following weeks the way warmth spreads through cold stone from the bottom up. It was awe. It was the strange, steadying, half-frightened awe of a people learning that they had been held all along. Because when the fear had said its piece, the facts remained, and the facts were these. That a small mistreated boy, whom the wizarding world's own greatest man had left in a cupboard and forgotten to check on for 6 years, had been found, not by wizards, who had failed him, but by a nation that wizards had spent centuries agreeing not to see, and had been fed, and warded, and kept, and loved, out of a promise, 91 years before the boy was boy, this boy the camo and trick in the eve can fen up, and there was not a witch or wizard in Britain, once they let themselves feel the shape of that, who did not feel it, the vertigo of a floor giving way, and then, underneath, the deeper floor, the older one, taking the weight. There is something beneath us that keeps its promises. It was a terrifying thing to learn and a wonderful thing to have learned, both at once in the way of all the truest things, and the wizarding world, which was not, on the whole, a bad world, mostly over time, chose to be steadied by it rather than afraid, because it is a better thing to be steadied than afraid, and most people given time choose the better thing to be steadied than afraid, and most people, given time, choose the better thing. The mothers chose it first. That was the part the prophet never quite reported, because it was not the sort of thing that made a headline, but it was the truest part, and Perpetua Wick, who noticed everything, noticed it. Wizarding mothers all over Britain reading over their breakfast tables about the boy in the cupboard whom nobody kept, looked across at their own children, and held them a little longer than usual, and were quiet for a while, and then, in 100 small ways over the following months, they began to be kinder to the goblins at the bank, not out of fear, but out of the thing that a mother feels toward whatever it was that kept a child no one else would keep. A witch would come to change her galleons and would say awkwardly, not knowing quite how to say it, "The boy, the Potter boy, is he all right down there?" And the teller would look at her and understand the question under the question, which was, "Are you the sort of people who would keep my child too, if it came to it?" And would answer gravely, "He is kept, madam. He is growing the whole way. We keep our accounts." And the witch would go home steadied and hold her own child, and that, more than any Wisengamot vote, was how the wizarding world made its peace with the floor beneath the floor, one mother at a time, over the bank counter, learning to be glad of a thing she had spent her whole life not seeing. Mara grinned when it was reported to her below in the warm dark, made her dry 90-year laughter. "There," she said. "That is the standing, and it was never the court. The court was the law. This is the standing. 1,000 years we have kept their gold and been surly about it, and been, in return, unseen, and it suited us, and it suited them, and it was a small arrangement for two peoples who might have been large to each other. And now, over one small boy's wrists, they have been made to see us, and the seeing frightened them, and then the seeing steadied them. And a wizard mother at the bank counter is learning to say thank you to a goblin, which has not happened in the whole history of the statute." She looked at Grivnak, who stood by her iron chair with a plate of accounts, and showed her long-worn teeth. "You found the oath in a ledger, finder. You thought you had found the end of the world. You had found the beginning of a better arrangement between two peoples, and it came, as the best things do, disguised as an inconvenience. Write that down, not in the nation's iron, in your own hand. Some things a finder should keep for himself." Grivnak wrote it down later, in his own hand, on the shelf in his cell, next to the wax practice plate where a wizard child had cut his first ugly true line of the deep script. And both of them are there still. Grivnak took Harry home to the deep by the Goblin Road, the same road they had come up by, and at the third gate they stopped, the way you stop at the third gate. And Harry put his fingers on the fresh-cut mark that had been struck for him, which was not so fresh now, and read it. He could read it now, ugly and true, the deep script cut straight. And he read it aloud, in the old tongue, the way Dalgruth had, and his small, clear voice cut true and did not round a single stroke. The gate that was held is held again. While you already find Menchhedert strike of 100 hammers that had not stopped for a whole after town and did not at hold, did not for mauled of the bulb, because she had heard they were kimbade her seldy word sibicobarded, Bert cad by bit of. Harry took the bowl from Ognella, and it was his, and no one would take it away, and when he had eaten it, she would fill it again. He sat on the low bench in the warm coal light, in the middle of the whole nation that had sworn to keep him, the old ones and the little ones, and he ate his bowl, and Grivnak sat beside him with a plate of iron under his arm and a reckoning pen behind his ear, and looked openly at the ward's wrists, and made a mark. "What does it say today?" Harry asked around a mouthful, the way he always asked now. "It says," Grivnak told him, turning the plate so the boy could see the small hard runes he had taught him to read, "that today the Ward of the Deep stood on the floor of the highest court of the wizarding world and told the chief warlock the difference between being safe and being kept, and was right, and came home hungry and ate 2 bowls. He touched the newest mark, and it says his wrists are the wrists of a boy who is growing the whole way. I do not round my strokes, Harry. I would not write it if it were not true." Harry leaned, a half-inch, toward the warm thing. Grivnak did not move away. Above them, the hammers rang, and beyond the gate the whole wide forgetful world went on in its light, learning slowly to live with the knowledge that there was a floor beneath its floor, and 3 miles under the earth, behind the third gate, in the warm, patient dark, a small boy who had once made himself smaller at the sound of a voice ate his second bowl among a nation that had crossed 91 years to keep him, and asked, because he liked the answer, and because Anik it Wanair, "Will you still be there tomorrow?" "Tomorrow," said Grivnak, "and every tomorrow after it. It is written down. You may check the account whenever you like. Goblins keep their accounts, Harry. All of them, however old." Chapter 5 End.